Chapter 17 of Five Little Peppers Midway. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Brianna Simmons. Five Little Peppers Midway by Margaret Sidney. Chapter 17. Phronsie is Found. "I am glad that you agree with me." Mrs. Chatterton bestowed a complacent smile upon the company. "But we don't in the least agree with you," said Madame Dyce, her stiff brocade rustling impatiently in the effort to put her declaration before the others. "Not in the least." "Ah? Well, you must allow that I have good opportunities to judge. The Pepper entanglement can be explained only by saying that my cousin's mental faculties are impaired." "The rest of the family are afflicted in the same way, aren't they?" remarked Hamilton Dyce nonchalantly. "Humph, yes." Mrs. Chatterton's still shapely shoulders allowed themselves a shrug intended to reveal volumes. "What Jasper Horatio King believes, the rest of the household accept as law and gospel. But it's no less infatuation." "I'll not hear one word involving those dear Peppers," cried Madame Dyce. "If I could, I'd have them in my house. And it's a most unrighteous piece of work, in my opinion, to endeavor to arouse prejudice against them. It goes quite to my heart to remember their struggles all those years." Mrs. Chatterton turned on her with venom. Was all the world arrayed against her, to take up with those hateful interlopers in her cousin's home? She made another effort. "I should have credited you with more penetration into motives than to allow yourself to be deceived by such a woman as Mrs. Pepper." "Do give her the name that belongs to her. I believe she's Mrs. Dr. Fisher, isn't she?" drawled Livingston Bailey, a budding youth, with a mustache that occasioned him much thought, and a solitary eyeglass. "Stuff and nonsense! Yes, what an absurd thing that wedding was! Did anybody ever hear or see the like?" Mrs. Chatterton lifted her long jeweled hands in derision, but as no one joined in the laugh, she dropped them slowly into her lap. "I don't see any food for scorn in that episode," said the youth with the mustache. "Possibly there will be another marriage there before many years. I'm sweet on Polly." Mrs. Chatterton's face held nothing but blank dismay. The rest shouted. "You needn't laugh, you people," said the youth, setting his eyeglass straight. "That girl is going to make a sensation, I tell you, when she comes out. I'm going to secure her early." "Not a word, mind you, about Miss Polly's preferences," laughed Hamilton Dyce aside to Miss Mary. "'Tisn't possible that she could be anything but fascinated, of course," Mary laughed back. "Of course not. The callow youth knows his power. Anybody else in favor of the Peppers?" aloud, and looking at the company. "Don't ask us if we like the Peppers," cried two young ladies simultaneously. "They are our especial and particular pets, every one of them." "The Peppers win," said Hamilton Dyce, looking full into Mrs. Chatterton's contemptuous face. "I'm glad to record my humble self as their admirer. Now, well, Pa!" Mary could not refrain from interrupting as her father suddenly appeared in the doorway. "I can't sit down," he said, as the company made way for him to join. "I came home for some important papers. I suppose you have heard the trouble at the King's? I happened to drop in there. Well, Dyce," laying his hand on that gentleman's chair, "I scarcely expected to see you here to-day. Why aren't you at the club spread?" "Cousin Horatio! I suppose he's had a paralytic attack," interrupted Mrs. Chatterton, with her most sagacious air. "What's the trouble up there?" queried Mr. Dyce, ignoring the question thrust at him. "It's the little beauty Phronsie," said Mr. Taylor. "Nothing's happened to that child, I hope?" cried Madame Dyce, paling. "Now, Mr. Taylor, you are not going to harrow our feelings by telling us anything has harmed that lovely creature," exclaimed the two young ladies excitedly. "Phronsie can't be found," said Mr. Taylor. "Can't be found!" echoed all the voices except Mrs. Chatterton's. She ejaculated, "Ridiculous!" Hamilton Dyce sprang to his feet and threw down his napkin. "Excuse me, Miss Taylor. Come, Bailey, now is the time to show our devotion to the family. Let us go and help them out of this." Young Bailey jumped lightly up and stroked his mustache like a man of affairs. "All right, Dyce? Bonjour, ladies." "How easily a scene is gotten up," said Mrs. Chatterton, "over a naughty little runaway. I wish some of the poor people in this town could have a tithe of the attention that is wasted on these Peppers," she added virtuously. Madame Dyce turned uneasily in her seat, and played with the almonds on her plate. "I think we do best to reserve our judgments," she said coolly. "I don't believe Phronsie has run away." "Of course she has," asserted Mrs. Chatterton in that positive way that made everybody hate her to begin with. "She was all right this morning when I left home. Where else is she, if she hasn't run away, pray tell?" Not being able to answer this, no one attempted it, and the meal ended in an uncomfortable silence. Driving home a half hour later, in a cab summoned for that purpose, Mrs. Chatterton threw off her things, angry not to find Hortense at her post in the dressing room, where she had been told to finish a piece of sewing, and not caring to encounter any of the family in their present excitement. She determined to take herself off upstairs, where "I can kill two birds with one stone, get rid of everybody and find my box myself, because of course that child ran away before she got it." She mounted the stairs laboriously, counting herself lucky indeed in finding the upper part of the house quite deserted, and shutting the lumber room door when she was well within it, she proceeded to open the door of the closet. "Hortense didn't tell me there was a spring lock on this door," she exclaimed, with an impatient pull. "Oh, good heavens!" She had nearly stumbled over Phronsie Pepper's little body, lying just where it fell when hope was lost. "I have had nothing to do with it," repeated Mrs. Chatterton to herself, following Mr. King and Jasper, as they bore Phronsie downstairs, her yellow hair floating from the pallid little face. "Goodness, I haven't had such a shock in years. My heart is going quite wildly. The child probably went up there for something else. I am not supposed to know anything about it." "Is she dead?" cried Dick, summoned with the rest of the household by Mrs. Chatterton's loud screams, and quite beside himself, he clambered up the stairs to get in everyone's way. Mrs. Chatterton, with an aimless thrust of her long jeweled hands, pushed him one side, and Dick boiled over at that. "What are you here for?" he cried savagely. "You don't love her. You would better get out of the way," and no one thought to reprove him. Polly was clinging to the post at the foot of the stairs. "I shall die if Phronsie is dead," she said. Then she looked at Mother Fisher, waiting for her baby. "Give her to me," said Phronsie's mother, holding out imperative arms. "You would better let us carry her. Well, put her in your bed. Only get the doctor." Mr. King was almost harsh as he endeavored to pass her, but before the words were over his lips, the mother held her baby. "Mamsie," cried Polly, creeping over to her like a hurt little thing, "I don't believe but that she'll be all right. God won't let anything happen to our Phronsie. He couldn't, Mamsie." Dr. Fisher met them at the door. Polly never forgot the long, slow terror that clutched at her heart as she scanned his face while he took the child out of the arms that now yielded up their burden, and everything turned dark before her. Was Phronsie dead? But there was Mamsie, and Polly caught her breath, beat back the faintness, and helped to lay Phronsie on the big bed. "Clearly I have had nothing to do with it," said Mrs. Chatterton to herself, stumbling into a room on the other end of the hall. But her face was gray, and she found herself picking nervously at the folds of lace at her throat. "The child went up there, as all children will, to explore. I shall say nothing about it, nothing whatever. Oh, how is she?" grasping blindly at Jasper's hand as he rushed by the door. "Still unconscious." "Stuff and oh! Well," muttering on, "she'll probably come to. Children can bear a little confinement. An hour or two doesn't matter with them. Hortense," aloud, "bring me my sal volatile. Dear me, this is telling on my nerves." She caught sight of her face in the long mirror opposite, and shivered to see how ghastly it was. "Where is the girl? Hortense, I say, come here this instant." A maid, summoned by her cries, put her head into the door. "Hadn't you better go into your own room, Mrs. Chatterton?" she said, in pity at the shaking figure and blanched face. "No," she sharply repulsed her. "Bring Hortense. Where is that girl?" she demanded passionately. "She's crying," said the maid, her own eyes filling with tears. "I'll help you to your room." "Crying?" Mrs. Chatterton shrieked. "She's paid to take care of me. What right has she to think of anything else?" "She says she was cross to Phronsie once, though I don't see how she could be, and now she's going to die, and the maid burst into tears and threw her apron over her face. "Die? She shan't. What utter nonsense everybody does talk in this house." Madame Chatterton seized her arm, the slender fingers tightening around the young muscles, and shook her fiercely. The maid, roused by her pain out of her tears, looked in affright into the gray face above her. "Let me go," she cried. "Oh, madame, you hurt me." "Give me air," said Madame Chatterton, her fingers relaxing, and making a great effort not to fall. "Help me over to the window and open it, girl." Leaning heavily on the slight figure, she managed to get across the room. "There, now," drawing a heavy breath as she sank into a chair and thrust her ashen face out over the sill. "Do you go and find out how the child is, and come back and tell me at once." "Madame, I'm afraid to leave you alone," said the girl, looking at her. "Afraid? I'm not so old but that I can take care of myself," said Mrs. Chatterton with a short laugh. "Go and do as I tell you," stamping her foot. Still unconscious. Would no one ever come near her but this detestable maid with her still more detestable news? Mrs. Chatterton clutched the window casing her extremity, not filling the soft springy air as she gasped for breath. The maid, too frightened to leave her, crept into a corner where she watched and cried softly. There was a stir in the household that they might have heard, betokening the arrival of 2 other doctors, but no word came, and darkness settled upon the room. Still the figure in the window niche held to its support, and still the maid cried at her post. As the gray of the twilight settled over the old stone mansion, Phronsie moved on her pillow. "Dear mouse," the circle of watchers around the bed moved closer, "I'll go away when someone comes to open the door." "Hush!" Dr. Fisher put his hand over the mother's lips. "Don't please bite very hard. I won't come again to your house. Oh, where's Grandpapa?" Old Mr. King put his head in his hands and sobbed aloud. The little white face moved uneasily. "Grandpapa always comes when I want him," in piteous tones. "Father," said Jasper, laying a hand on the bowed shoulders, "you would better come out. We'll call you when she comes to herself." But Mr. King gave no sign of hearing. A half hour ticked slowly away, and Phronsie spoke again. "It's growing dark, and I suppose they will never come. Dear mouse." The words died away, and she seemed to sleep. "I shall not tell," Mrs. Chatterton was saying to herself in the other room. "What good could it do? Oh, this vile air is stifling. Will no one come to say she is better?" And so the night wore on. As morning broke, Phronsie opened her eyes and gave a weak little cry. Polly sprang from her knees at the foot of the bed and staggered toward the child. "Don't!" cried Jasper, with a hand on her arm. "Let her alone," said Dr. Fisher quickly. "Oh, Polly!" Phronsie raised herself convulsively on the bed. "You did come, you did!" winding her little arms around Polly's neck. "Has the mouse gone?" "Yes, yes," said Polly as convulsively. "He's all gone, Phronsie, and I have you fast, just see, and I'll never let you go again." "Never?" cried Phronsie, straining to get up further into Polly's arms. "No, dear, I'll hold you close just as long as you need me. And he won't come again?" "He can't, Phronsie, because, you see, I have you now." "And the door will open, and I'll have Mamsie and dear Grandpapa?" "Yes, yes, my precious one," began Mr. King, getting out of the large armchair into which they had persuaded him. "Don't do it, stay where you are," said Dr. Fisher, stopping him halfway across the room. "But Phronsie wants me, she said so," exclaimed old Mr. King hoarsely, and trying to push his way past the doctor. "Why, man, don't stop me." Dr. Fisher planted his small body firmly in front of the old gentleman. "You must obey me." Obey? When had Mr. King heard that word addressed to himself? He drew a long breath, looked full into the spectacled eyes, and said, "All right, Dr. Fisher, I suppose you know best," and went back to his armchair. "I'm so tired, Polly," Phronsie was saying, and the arms, Polly could feel, were dropping slowly from her neck. "Are you, pet? Well, now, I'll tell you what we'll do. Let us both go to sleep. There, Phronsie. Now you put your arms down, so." Polly gave them a swift little tuck under the bedclothes. "And I'll get up beside you, so," and she crept into the bed. "And we'll both go right to Nodland, don't you know?" "You're sure you won't let me go?" whispered Phronsie, cuddling close and feeling for Polly's neck again. "Oh, just as sure as I can be," declared Polly cheerfully, while the tears rained down her cheeks in the darkness. "I feel something wet," said Phronsie, drawing back one hand. "What is it, Polly?" "Oh, that!" said Polly with a start. "Oh, well, I'm crying, Phronsie. But I'm so glad. Oh, you don't know how glad I am, sweet," and she leaned over and kissed her. "If you're glad," said Phronsie weakly, "I don't care. But please don't cry if you're not glad, Polly." "Well, now we're fixed," said Polly as gaily as she could. "Give me your hand, pet. There, now, good night." "Good night," said Phronsie. Polly could feel her tucking the other hand under her cheek on the pillow. And then, blessed sound, the long quiet breathing that told of rest. "Oh, better, is she?" Mrs. Chatterton looked up quickly to see Mrs. Whitney's pale face. "Well, I suppose she would be. I thought I'd sit here and wait, you know, since you were all so frightened. But I knew it wouldn't amount to much. Now, girl," nodding over to the maid still in the corner, "you may get me to bed," and she stretched her stiff limbs, and held out her hand imperatively. "It was very fortunate that I did not tell," she said, when the slow passage to her own apartments had been achieved. "Now if the child will only keep still, all will be well." End of Chapter 17. Recording by Brianna Simmons. Carson City, Nevada. www.simispot.blogspot.com. Chapter 18 of Five Little Peppers Midway. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Brianna Simmons. Five Little Peppers Midway by Margaret Sidney. Chapter 18. The Girls Have Polly Again. "Phronsie shall have a baked apple this morning," said Mother Fisher, coming into the sunny room where Phronsie lay propped up against the pillows. "Did Papa Doctor say so?" asked Phronsie, a smile of supreme content spreading over her wan little face. "Yes, he did," said her mother. "As nice an apple, red and shiny as we could find, is downstairs baking for you, Phronsie. When it's done, Sarah is to bring it up." "That will be very nice," breathed Phronsie slowly. "And I want my little tea set, just the 2 cups and saucers, and my own little pot and sugar bowl. Do let me, Mamsie, and you shall have a cup of milk with me," she cried, a little pink color stealing into either cheek. "Yes, yes, child," said Mother Fisher. "There, you mustn't try to lean forward. I'll bring the little table Grandpapa bought. So." She hurried over across the room and wheeled it into place. "Now, isn't that fine, Phronsie?" as the long wing swung over the bed. "Did you ever see such a tea party as you and I'll have?" "Breakfast party, Mamsie," hummed Phronsie. "Isn't that just lovely?" wriggling her toes under the bedclothes. "Do you think Sarah'll ever bring that apple?" "Yes, indeed. Why, here she is now," announced Mrs. Fisher cheerily. "Come in, Sarah," as a rap sounded on the door. "Our little girl is all ready for that good apple. My, what a fine one!" "Bless honey's heart!" ejaculated Sarah, her black face shining with delight. "Ain't he a beauty, though?" setting down on the table wing a pink plate, in the midst of which reposed an apple whose crackling skin disclosed a toothsome interior. "I'll bring pink saucers so's to match his insides. But ain't he rich, though?" "Sarah," said Phronsie, with hungry eyes on the apple, "I think he is very nice indeed, and I do thank you for bringing him." "Bless her precious heart!" cried Sarah, her hands on her ample hips, and her mouth extended in the broadest of smiles. "Do get me a spoon, Mamsie," begged Phronsie, unable to take her gaze from the apple. "I'm so glad he has a stem on," Sarah, carefully picking at it. "Well, there," said Sarah, "I had the greatest work to save that stem, but la! I wouldn't have brung it without a stem. I knowed you'd want it, to hold it up by, when you eat most off." "Yes, I do," said Phronsie, in great satisfaction, fondling the stem. "And here's your spoon," said her mother, bringing it. "Now, child, enjoy it to your heart's content." Phronsie set the spoon within the cracked skin, and drew out half full. "Oh, Mamsie!" she cried, as her teeth closed over it, "do just taste, it's so good." "Hee hee!" laughed Sarah, "I guess 'tis. Such works as I had to bake that apple just right. But he's a beauty, ain't he, though?" Phronsie did not reply, being just at that moment engaged in conveying a morsel as much like her own as possible to her mother's mouth. "Seems to me I never tasted such an apple," said Mother Fisher, slowly swallowing the bit. "Did you now?" cried Sarah. Downstairs, Polly was dancing around the music room with 3 or 4 girls who had dropped in on their way from school. "Give me a waltz now, Polly," begged Philena. "Dear me, I haven't had a sight of you hardly for so long, I'm positively starved for you. I don't care for you other girls now," she cried, as the two went whirling down the long room together. "Thank you, Miss Philena," cried the others, seizing their partners and whirling off too. "I feel as if I could dance forever," cried Polly, when Amy Garrett turned away from the piano and declared she would play no more, and she still pirouetted on one foot, to come up red as a rose to the group. "Look at Polly's cheeks," cried Amy. "You've been a white little minx so long," said Alexia, putting a fond arm around Polly. "I went home and cried every day after I would steal around the back to see how Phronsie was." "Won't Phronsie be downstairs soon?" asked Amy. "I don't know," said Polly. "Papa Doctor is going to be dreadfully careful of her, that she doesn't get up too soon." "Say, Polly," cried another girl, "don't you have to take a lot of pills and stuff now that Dr. Fisher is your father?" Polly threw back her head and laughed merrily. It sounded so strangely to her to hear the sound echoing through the room so long silent, that she stopped suddenly. "Oh, girls, I can't hardly believe even yet that Phronsie is almost well," she cried. "Well, you'd better," advised Alexia philosophically, "because she is, you know. Do laugh again, Polly, it's good to hear you." "I can't help it," said Polly. "Cathie asked such a funny question." "Cathie's generally a goose," said Alexia coolly. "Thank you," said Cathie, a tall girl with such light hair and sallow face that she looked 10 years older than her 14 summers. "I sometimes know quite as much as a few other people of my acquaintance," she said pointedly. "I didn't say but that you didn't," said Alexia composedly. "I said that you were generally a goose, and so you are. Why, everybody knows that, Cath." "Come, come, girls, don't fight," said Polly. "How can you when Phronsie is getting better? Alexia didn't mean anything, Cathie." "Yes, she did," declared Cathie with a pout. "She's always meaning something. She's the hatefulest thing I ever saw." "Nonsense," said Polly with a gay little laugh. "She says perfectly dreadful things to me, and so I do to her, but we don't either of us mind them." "Well, those are in fun," said Cathie. "That's a very different matter." "So you must make these in fun," said Polly. "I would if I were you." But she drew away from Alexa's arm. "Polly, don't be an idiot and fight with me," whispered Alexia in her ear. "Go away," said Polly, shaking her off. "Polly, Polly, I'll say anything if you won't look like that. See here, Cathie, let's make up." And she ran over, seized the tall girl by the waist, and spun her around till she begged to stop. "Is that your way of making up?" cried Cathie, when she had the breath to speak. "Yes, it is as good as any other way. It spins the nonsense out of you. There!" With a last pat on the thin shoulder, she left her and ran back to Polly. "It's all done," she cried. "I'm at peace with the whole world. Now don't look like an ogre any longer." "Phronsie's actually hungry now all the time," confided Polly in a glow, "and we can't get enough to satisfy her." "Good, good!" cried the girls. "I'm going to send her some of my orange jelly," declared Alexia. "I'll make it just as soon as I go home. Do you think she will like it, Polly?" she asked anxiously. "Yes, I do believe she will," said Polly, "because she loves oranges so." "Well, I shan't make any orange jelly," cried Cathie, her nose in the air. "Faugh! It's insipid enough." "But 'tisn't when it's made the way Alexa makes it," said Polly, viewing in alarm the widening of the breach between the two. "I've eaten some of hers, and it's too splendid for anything." "I don't know anything about hers, but all orange jelly I've tasted is just horrid. I hate it. I'm going to make almond macaroons. They're lovely, Polly." "Oh, don't, Cathie," begged Polly in distress. "Why not, pray tell?" whirling on one set of toes. "You needn't be afraid they won't be good. I've made them thousands of times." "But she couldn't eat them," said Polly. "Just think, almond macaroons! Why, Papa Doctor would." "Now I know the doctor makes you take perfectly terrible things, and won't let you eat anything, and macaroons are the only thing I can make. It's a shame." And down sat Cathie in despair on an ottoman. "What's the matter?" Dr. Fisher put his head in at the doorway, his spectacled eyes sending a swift glance of inquiry around. "O dear me!" exclaimed Cathie in a fright, jumping up and clutching the arm of the girl next to her. "Don't let Polly tell him what I said. Don't." "Polly won't tell," said the girl with a superb air. "Don't you know any better, Cathie Harrison, you goose, you?" To be called a goose by two persons in the course of an hour was too much for Cathie's endurance, and flinging off the girl's arm, she cried out passionately, "I won't stay. I am going home," and rushed out the door. Dr. Fisher turned from a deliberate look at the girl's white cheeks as she ran past, to the flushed ones before him. "I am very sorry that anything unpleasant has happened. I dropped in to tell you of a little surprise, but I see it's no time now." "Oh, Papa Doctor!" cried Polly, flying up to him from the center of the group. "It was nothing, only" "A girl's quarrel is not a slight thing, Polly," said little Dr. Fisher, gravely, "and one of your friends has gone away very unhappy." "Oh, I know it," said Polly, "and I'm so sorry." "We can't any of us help it," said Alexia quickly. "Cathie Harrison has the temper of a gorilla, so there, Dr. Fisher." Dr. Fisher set his spectacles straight and looked at Alexia, but he did not even smile as she hoped he would do. "I can't help it," she said, tracing the pattern of the carpet with the toe of her boot. "She makes us all so uncomfortable. Oh, you can't think! And I wish she'd stay home forever." Still no answer from the doctor. He didn't act as if he'd heard, but bowing gravely, he withdrew his head and shut the door. "Oh, dear, dear!" cried Alexia, when they had all looked at each other a breathing space. "Why didn't he speak? I'd much rather he'd scold like everything than to look like that. Polly, why don't you say something?" "Because there isn't anything to say." Polly got no further, and turned away, suspiciously near to tears. Was this the first meeting with the girls to which she had looked forward so long? "To think of that Cathie Harrison making such a breeze!" cried Alexia, angrily. "A girl who's just come among us, as it were, and we only let her in our set because Miss Salisbury asked us to make things pleasant for her. If it had been any one else who raised such a fuss." Meantime, Dr. Fisher strode out to the west porch, intending to walk down to his office, and buttoning up his coat as he went along. As he turned the angle in the drive, he came suddenly upon a girl who had thrown herself down in a rustic seat under a tree, and whose shoulders were shaking so violently that he knew she was sobbing, though he heard no sound. "Don't cry," said the little doctor. "And what's the matter?" all in the same breath, and sitting down beside her. Cathie looked up with a gasp, and then crushed her handkerchief over her eyes. "Those girls in there are perfectly horrid." "Softly, softly," said Dr. Fisher. "I can't help it. No matter what I say, they call me names, and I'm tired of it. Oh, dear, dear!" "Now see here," said the doctor, getting up on his feet and drawing a long breath, "I'm on my way to my office. Suppose you walk along with me a bit and tell me all about it." Cathie opened her mouth, intending to say, "Oh, I can't!" Instead, she found herself silent, and not knowing how, she was presently pacing down the drive by the doctor's side. "Polly Pepper!" exclaimed Alexia, as a turn in the drive brought the two figures in view of the music room windows. "Did you ever see such a sight in your life? Cathie is walking off with Dr. Fisher. There isn't anything her tongue won't say." "Did you tell Polly?" cried Jasper, a half hour later, putting his head into Dr. Fisher's office. "Oh, beg pardon, I didn't know you were busy, sir." "Come in," said the doctor, folding up some powders methodically. "No, I didn't tell Polly." "Oh," said Jasper in a disappointed tone, "I hadn't a fair chance." "But she ought to know it just as soon as it's talked of," said Jasper, fidgeting at a case of little vials on the table. "Oh, beg pardon again. I'm afraid I've smashed that chap," as one rolled off to the floor. "I'm no end sorry," picking up the bits ruefully. "I have several like it," said the doctor kindly, and settling another powder in its little paper. "There were a lot of girls with Polly when I looked in upon her on my way out, but we'll catch a chance to tell her soon, my boy." "Oh, I suppose so. A lot of giggling creatures. How Polly can stand their chatter, I don't see," said Jasper impatiently. "They've been shut off from Polly for some time, you know," said Dr. Fisher quietly. "We must remember that." "Polly doesn't like some of them a bit better than I do," said Jasper explosively, "only she puts up with their nonsense." "It's rather a difficult matter to pick and choose girls who are in the same classes," said the doctor, "and Polly sees that." "Don't I know it!" exclaimed Jasper in an astonished tone. "Dear me, Dr. Fisher, I've watched Polly for years now, and she's always done so." He stopped whirling the articles on the office table, and bestowed a half offended look on the little physician. "Softly, softly, Jasper," said Dr. Fisher composedly. "Of course you've used your eyes. Now don't spoil things by saying anything, but let Polly go get her own gait, I beg of you." Then he turned to his powders once more. "She will anyway," declared Jasper. "Whatever she makes up her mind to do, Polly does that very thing." "Not a bad characteristic," laughed the doctor. "I should say not. Now, when I come up home for dinner, you and I will find Polly and tell her the good news. If she's with a lot of those silly girls, I'll tear her off this time." Dr. Fisher glared so fiercely as he declared this determination that Jasper laughed outright. "I thought no one was to disturb Polly's good intentions in that line," he cried. "Well, there's an end to all things, and patience ceases to be a virtue sometimes. So I've thought many times, but I've borne it like a man." Jasper drew himself up, and laughed again at the doctor's face. "Oh, you go along," cried Dr. Fisher, his eyes twinkling. "I'll meet you just before dinner." "All right," as Jasper rushed off. Dr. Fisher jumped to his feet, pushing aside the litter of powder papers and bottles, and ran his fingers through the shock of gray hair standing straight on his head. "Yes, yes," he muttered, walking to the window. "It will be a good thing for Polly. Now I tell you, Adoniram," he always preferred to address himself by his first name, then he was sure of a listener, "a vastly good thing. It's quite time that some of the intimacies with these silly creatures are broken up a bit, while the child gains immensely in other ways." He rubbed his palms gleefully. "Oh, good morning, good morning." A patient walked in, looked up at the jolly doctor. "I wish I could laugh like that," he ejaculated, his long face working in unusual effort to achieve a smile. "You would if you had a gay crowd of children, such as I have," cried the little doctor proudly. "Why, man, that's better than all my doses." "But I haven't the children," said the patient sourly, and sitting down with a sigh. "I pity you then," said Dr. Fisher, with the air of having been a family man for years. "Well, besides owning the Peppers, I'm going off with them too." There he stopped, for before he knew it the secret was well nigh out. End of chapter 18. Recording by Brianna Simmons, Carson City, Nevada, www.simispot.blogspot.com. Chapter 19 of Five Little Peppers Midway. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Brianna Simmons.
Five Little Peppers Midway, by Margaret Sidney. Chapter 19. Phronsie is well again. But Polly was not to be told yet. When Papa Fisher walked in to dinner, the merry party around the oak table were waiting over ices and coffee for his appearance. "Oh, Papa Fisher!" cried Polly in dismay, turning from one of Alexia's sallies, and dropping her spoon. "Now you're all tired out. Too bad!" Mother Fisher flushed up and set her lips closely together. Ben looked disapproval across the board, and Polly knew that the wrong thing had been said. "Oh, I didn't mean of course you must take care of the sick people," she said impulsively. "Yes, I must," said Dr. Fisher wearily, and pushing up the shock of gray hair to a stiffer brush over his brow. "That's what I set out to do, I believe." "But that's no reason why you should tire yourself to death and break down the first year," said Mr. King, eyeing him sharply. "Zounds, man, that isn't what I brought you up from the country for." Dr. Fisher looked into his wife's eyes and smiled. "I believe you brought me," the smile said, but he kept his tongue still. "And you must get accustomed to seeing suffering that you can't help. Why, man alive, the town's full of it. You can't expect to stop it alone." "I'll do what I can to help," said the little doctor between his teeth, and taking a long draught of the coffee his wife put by his plate. "I suppose there's no objection to that. Now that's good," smacking his lips in a pleased way. "Of course not, if you help in the right way," said old Mr. King stoutly, "but I'll wager anything that you're picking up all sorts of odd jobs among the poor that belong to the young doctors. Your place is considerably higher, where you can pick and choose your patients." Dr. Fisher laughed an odd little laugh that, along with its pleasant note, carried the ring of a strong will. "Oh, well, you know, I'm too old to learn new ways," he said. "Better let me wag on at the old ones." Mr. King gave an exclamation of disapproval. "It's lucky your time is short," he said grimly, and the secret was nearly out. "Phronsie is coming downstairs to-morrow, isn't she?" asked Jasper quickly over to the doctor. "Oh, no, indeed, I think not," answered Mr. King before Dr. Fisher had time to reply. "She would better wait a day or two longer. Isn't that so, doctor?" at last appealing to him. "I don't agree with you." The little doctor drew off his attention from his plate. "You see, she has regained her strength remarkably. Now the quicker she is in the family life again, the better for her." "Oh, good, good!" cried Polly, delighted at the safe withdrawal from the precipice of dangerous argument. "Alexia, now you must help us think up something to celebrate her coming downstairs." "Not so fast, Polly." The little doctor beamed at her in a way surprising to see after the morning's affair. "Phronsie won't be ready for any celebration before next week. Then I think you may venture." Alexia pouted and played with her spoon. "Oh, dear!" cried Dick dolefully. "What's the reason we must wait a whole week, pray tell?" "Because Father Fisher says so," replied Ben across the table. "That's the principal reason, and it doesn't need any more to support it." "Well, I'll tell you," broke in Polly in her brightest way. "Let us think up perfectly splendid things. It is best as it is, for it will take us a week to get ready." "I shall get her a new doll," declared Mr. King. The rest shouted, "Her others must be quite worn out." "What could you get her," cried Mr. Whitney, "in the way of a doll? Do tell us, for I really do not see." "Why, one of those phonograph dolls, to be sure," cried Mr. King promptly. "Are they on sale yet?" asked Jasper. "I thought they had not perfected them enough for the market." "I think I know where one can be bought," said his father. "They must be perfected. It's all nonsense that I can't find one if Phronsie wants it. Yes, she shall have a phonograph doll." "That will be perfectly elegant," exclaimed Polly with sparkling eyes. "Won't Phronsie be delighted when she hears it talk?" "She ought to have a Punch and Judy show," said Mrs. Whitney. "She's always so pleased with them, father." Mr. King pushed away his coffee cup, and pulled out his notebook. "Punch and Judy, down that goes," he said, noting it after phonograph doll. "What else?" "Can't we have some of those boys up from the orphan asylum?" asked Polly, after a minute in which everyone had done a bit of hard thinking. "Phronsie loves to hear them sing when she goes there." "Oh, they are so cunning." She'll want to give them her best toys and load them down with all her possessions. You see if she doesn't," warned Jasper. "Well, she won't give away her new doll, anyway," cried Polly. "No, she never gives away any one of the dolls you've given her, Father," said Mrs. Whitney slowly, "not a single one. I tried her one day, asking her to give me one to bestow on a poor child, and she quite reproached me by the look in her brown eyes. I haven't asked her since." "What did she say?" asked Mr. King abruptly. "I can't, Auntie. Dear Grandpapa gave them to me himself." Then she ran for her savings bank and poured out the money in my lap. "Let's go out and buy the poor child a doll," she begged, and I really had to do it, and there must be at least 200 dolls in this house. 200 dolls!" cried Alexia in astonishment, and raising her hands. "Why, yes, Father has been bringing Phronsie dolls for at least 5 years, with the greatest faithfulness, till her family has increased to a painful extent." "Oh, dear me!" cried Alexia with great emphasis. "I should think they'd be underfoot in every room." "Well, indeed they're not," said Polly. "She keeps them up in her playroom." "And the playroom closet," said Mrs. Whitney. "That is full. I peeped in there yesterday, and the dolls are ranged according to the times when Father gave them to her." "And the baby house is just crowded," laughed Jasper. "I know, because I saw her moving out her chairs and tables to make room." "Oh, dear me!" exclaimed Alexia again, for want of something else to say. "I just hate dolls," exploded Dick. "Faugh! How can girls play with them? They are so silly, and Phronsie always has something to do for hers, so she can't come when I want her to. I wish they were burned up," he added vindictively. Mr. King rubbed his forehead in a puzzled way. "Perhaps she has enough," he said at last. "Yet what shall I give her if I don't buy a doll?" "I'd give her the phonograph one, Father," said Mrs. Whitney, "anyway." "Yes, of course, but after that, what shall I do?" He looked so troubled that Mrs. Whitney hastened to say, "Oh, well, Father, you know when you are abroad," and the secret was nearly out for the second time. But they were saved by the appearance of Alexia's father, who often dropped in on the edge of the dinner hour for a second cup of coffee. The next morning Phronsie was waiting for Grandpapa King, who insisted that no one else should carry her downstairs. The remainder of the household, in various stages of delight and expectation, revolved around her chair, and curbed their impatience as best they might, in hall and on staircase. "Oh, Grandpapa, do hurry," begged Dick, kicking his heels on the stairs. "Hush, Dickie boy," said Mamma. "Grandpapa can't come till his agent is gone. Don't you hear them talking in the library?" "Well, I wish Mr. Fraser would take himself off. He is a nuisance," declared the boy. "He's been here a whole hour." "Here comes Grandpapa," announced Polly gleefully from a station nearer the library. "Hush now, Mr. Fraser's going." The library door opening at this announcement, and a few sentences charged with business floating up the staircase, the bustle around Phronsie became joyfully intense. "Mamsie, don't you think she ought to have a shawl on?" cried Polly anxiously, running over the stairs. "She's been shut up so long." "No," said Mother Fisher. "Doctor told me particularly not to bundle her up. It was the last thing he said before he went to his office." "Well," said Polly with a sigh, "then there isn't absolutely anything more to do for her. Why doesn't Grandpapa come?" "You are worse than Dicky," said Mrs. Fisher with a little laugh. "Dear me, Polly, just think how old you are." Phronsie stood quite still in the middle of the floor and folded her hands. "I want to see Grandpapa all alone when he comes up," she said. "What for?" cried Polly, pausing in astonishment. "Do you want us all to go out, Phronsie?" asked her mother slowly. "Yes," said Phronsie, shaking her yellow head with great decision. "Please, every single one go out. Mamsie, I want to see Grandpapa quite alone." "All right, child," said Mrs. Fisher, with a look at Polly. So after a little demur, and consequent delay on the part of the others, the door was closed, and she was left standing all alone. Phronsie drew a long breath. "I wish Grandpapa would come," she said to herself. "And so you wanted me, did you, dear?" cried Mr. King joyfully, as he hurried in and closed the door carefully. "Well, now, see if I can guess what you want to tell me." "Grandpapa," said Phronsie, standing quite still, and turning a puzzled face toward him, "I don't want to tell you anything. I want to ask you something." "Well, well, dear, what is it?" Old Mr. King, not stopping for a chair, leaned over her and stroked her yellow head. "Now then, look up, and ask me right off, Phronsie." "Must a person keep a promise?" asked Phronsie. "A really and truly promise, Grandpapa?" "Yes, yes," said the old gentleman with great abruptness. "To be sure one must, Phronsie, to be sure. So now if anyone has promised you anything, do you make him stick to it. It's mean enough to break your word, child." Phronsie drew a long breath. "That's all, Grandpapa," she said, and lifting up her arms, "Now take me downstairs, please." She laid a cool little cheek against his, as he raised her to his shoulder. "Remember what I say, Phronsie," laughed Mr. King, his mind more intent on the delightful face that he was carrying down the longed-for burden to the family life, than on what he was saying. "And if anyone has promised you anything, keep him up sharp to pay you. I verily believe it is that scamp Dick. Here goes!" and reaching the door, he threw it wide. "Forward march!" "Well, is the important conference over?" asked Polly, with a keen look at them both. Mrs. Fisher's eyes did their duty, but she said nothing. "Yes, indeed," declared Mr. King, marching on gaily. "Now clear the way, there, all you good people. Here, you Dick, drumming your heels, and go ahead, sir." "I'm glad enough to do it," shouted Dick, racing down the remainder of the stairs. "Hallo, Phronsie," waving his hand at her. "Three cheers and a tiger. Bother, here comes Mrs. Chatterton." Which was quite true. To everyone's astonishment, the door of that lady's apartment opened slowly, disclosing her in new morning wrapper, preparing to join the cavalcade. "Good morning, Cousin Eunice," cried Mr. King gaily. He could be merry with anyone this day. "Come on, this is a festal occasion, you see. Phronsie's going downstairs for the first time. Fall into line." "I'm not able to go down," said Mrs. Chatterton, coming slowly out into the hall, "but I'll stand here and see the parade." "Bully!" exploded Dick softly, peering up from the foot of the stairs. Phronsie looked over Mr. King's shoulder at her as she was borne down the stairs, and putting out her hand, "I'm all well now," she said. "Yes, I see," said Mrs. Chatterton. Then she pulled up her white shawl with a shiver. "It's rather cold here," she said. "After all, I believe I must get back to my room." Nobody noticed when she crept back, the hilarity now being so great below stairs. "I certainly am losing ground," she muttered. "Every little thing affects me so. I'll step into Bartram's office next time I go downtown and set that little matter straight, since I've made up my mind to do it. It would never do to let him come to the house. Horatio would suspect something to see my lawyer here, and the whole household imagine I was going to die right off. No, no, I must go there, that's clear. Then, if it's attended to, I'll live all the longer with nothing on my mind." Phronsie, meanwhile, was going around from room to room in a pleased way, and touching different objects gently. "Everything's new, isn't it, Polly?" she said at last, "when you stay upstairs. Oh, there's my kittens in the basket," pointing to a bisque vase on the table. "Yes," said Polly, "Mamsie brought it in here, and we've some flowers. Alexia sent them over. They're out in the back hall. We saved them for you to put in yourself." "Oh!" exclaimed Phronsie. "That's so good in you, Polly." "Don't stop now," cried Dick in disgust. "Faugh! You can fix flowers any time. Come out into the dining room, and you'll see something you like." Phronsie smothered a sigh, and turned slowly away from the kittens waiting in their basket for Alexia's flowers. "Come on," shouted Dick, seizing her hand. "You never can guess what it is in all this world." "Is it a new dog?" asked Phronsie fearfully, whose memory of Dick's latest purchase was not altogether happy. "No," said Dick, pulling her on. "Better than that." "Don't hurry her so," said Polly. "What have you got, Dick?" "Now, do you mind, sir," cried Jasper, "else we'll stop your pretty plan." "I won't hurry her," said Dick, slackening his gait. "Well, here we are," opening the dining room door. "Why, Jane has let it out." Phronsie fell back a step at this, and tried to cover her feet with her gown, searching the floor for it. "Look out!" cried Dick suddenly. "There he goes!" and something whirred over Phronsie's head. "Oh, what is it?" she cried, tumbling into Jasper's arms, and clasping his neck. "Oh, oh!" "Why, it's a swallow," cried Dick, in the babel that ensued. "A beautiful one, too. I've just caught him, and I made Jane let me bring it in here to surprise you," he added proudly. "Well, you've succeeded," cried Jasper, holding Phronsie close. "There, there, child, it's all right. It's a bird, Phronsie, and he's gone upstairs." "He'll frighten my dolls," cried Phronsie in new alarm, hanging to Jasper's neck. "Oh, do let us go upstairs and tell them he's only a bird." "Run along, Dick, and catch your old bird," cried Jasper, "and clear out with him. Quick now." "He's the best thing there is in this house," cried Dick, going over the back stairs 2 at a time. "Girls are so silly." "Bring him down," said Polly, moving along to the foot, "and I'll show him to Phronsie and tell her about him. Then she'll like him, Dick." "I'll like him, Dick," echoed Phronsie, "if he doesn't frighten my dolls." This episode taking the family life to the rear of the house, no one noticed that the soft footsteps were passing through the open front door, that Jane, who was sweeping the vestibule, had left ajar to run and tell Dick that she had not let the bird out of the dining room, so the uninvited guest to the household let himself up easily to the scene of his hopes, the location of the ladies' jewel boxes. End of chapter 19. Recording by Brianna Simmons, Carson City, Nevada. www.simmyspot.blogspot.com. Chapter 20 of 5 Little Peppers Midway. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Brianna Simmons. 5 Little Peppers Midway by Margaret Sidney. Chapter 20. The Secret. Mrs. Chatterton, standing by her toilet table, carefully examining her wealth of gray hair to note the changes in its tint, was suddenly surprised in the very act of picking out an obnoxious white hair by a slight noise in the further corner of the apartment, and dropping her fingers quickly, and turning away from the glass, she exclaimed, "How dare you, Hortense, come in without knocking?" "If you make a noise, I'll kill you," declared a man, standing in the shadow of the portiere, and watching her underneath a slouched black hat. There was a slight click that caused the listener's nerve to thrill. But her varied life had brought her nothing if not self-control, and she coolly answered, "If you want my money, say so." "Not exactly money, ma'am," said the man, "for I don't suppose you have much here, but I'll thank you to hand over that box of diamonds." He extended the other hand with its dingy fingers toward a large ebony jewel case, elaborate with its brass hinges, and suggestive of double locks, on a corner of the table. "If you are determined to take it, I suppose I must give it to you," said Mrs. Chatterton, with evident reluctance, handing the box designated, very glad to think she had just but a few days before changed the jewels to another repository to escape Hortense's prying eyes. In making the movement, she gave a sweeping glance out the window. Should she dare to scream? Michael was busy on the lawn, she knew. She could hear his voice talking to one of the under gardeners. "See here, old lady," warned the man, "you keep your eyes in the room. Now then," his greedy glance fastened on the glittering gems on her fingers, "I'll thank you to rip them things off." Dick raced along the further end of the hall after his bird with a "Whoop la! I've almost caught you!" Startling him, he proceeded to perform the service for himself. "There he goes!" cried Dick. "In her room! Bother! Well, I must catch him." So without the preamble of knocking, the boy dashed into the dressing room. The bird, whizzing ahead of him, flashed between the drawn folds of the portiere. "Excuse me," cried Dick, rushing in, "but my swallow! Oh!" "Go back!" cried Mrs. Chatterton hoarsely. "You'll be killed." The bird flying over his head and the appearance of the boy disconcerted the robber for one instant. He held the long white hand in his, tearing off the rings. There was no chance for her to escape, she knew, but she could save Dick. "Go back!" she screamed again. There was only a moment to think, but Dick dashed in, and with a mighty spirit, but small fists, he flung himself against the stalwart arms and shoulders. "Oh, heavens!" screamed Mrs. Chatterton. "He's but a boy, let him go. You shall have the rings. Help, help!" Dick, clutching and tearing blindly at whatever in the line of hair or ragged garment he could lay hold of, was waging an unequal warfare, but what he did was accomplished finely, and the bird, rushing blindly into the midst of the contention, with whirrings and flappings indescribable, helped more than an army of servants to confuse the man. Notwithstanding it was soon over, but not before Mrs. Chatterton had wrenched her fingers free, and grasped the pistol from its loose hold in his other hand. The box under his arm fell to the floor, and Dick was just being tossed to the other side of the room. She could hear him strike the cheval glass with a dull thud. "I can shoot as well as you," said Mrs. Chatterton, handling the pistol deftly. "Make a noise and I will." He knew it by her eyes that she had taken good aim. "Where are you, Dick?" cried Polly's voice outside, and rapping at the door. "Mrs. Chatterton, have you seen him?" "Come in," called Mrs. Chatterton, with firmest of fingers on the trigger, and her flashing eyes fastened upon the seamed, dirty face before her. Polly threw wide the door. "We have a man here that we don't want," said Mrs. Chatterton. "I'll take care of him till you get help. Hurry!" "Oh, Dick!" cried Polly in a breath, with a fearful glance at the boy lying there. "I think he's all right, Polly." She dared say no more, for Dick had not stirred. Polly clasped her hands and rushed out almost into Jasper's face. "A burglar! A burglar!" and he dashed into Mrs. Chatterton's room. "Don't interfere," said Mrs. Chatterton. "I'm a splendid markswoman." "You needn't shoot," said the man sullenly. "I won't stir." "No, I don't think you will," said the gray-haired woman, her eyes alight and her hand firm as a rock. "Well, here are the men." Jasper had seized a table spread, and as Michael and the under gardeners advanced, he went back of the robber and cleverly threw it over his head. It was easy to secure and bind him then. Polly rushed over to Dick. "Turn the creature over and let us see how he looks," said Mr. King, hurrying in as the last knot of the rope was made fast. The old slouched hat had fallen off in the struggle, and the man's features came plainly to view. "He's no beauty, and that's a fact." "I've seen that fellow round here for many a day," said Michael, giving the recumbent legs a small kick. "Onct he asked me if we wanted any work done. I mind ye, you see," with another attention from his gardening boot. "I want to tie one rope," cried a voice. Dick opened his eyes, rubbed them, and felt of his head. "I'm all right, Polly. I saw stars, but I've got over it, I guess. Let me give him the last knot." He staggered blindly to his feet. "I'll tie for you," said Jasper. "Trust me, Dick's all right. Only stunned," he telegraphed to the rapidly increasing group. "Tell his mother so, do, somebody," said old Mr. King. "Well, Cousin Eunice, you've covered yourself with glory," he turned on her warmly. She had thrown aside the pistol and now sank into a chair. "Never mind," she waved it off carelessly. "I'll imagine the compliments. Just now I want a glass of wine. Call Hortense, will you?" The man on the floor tried to raise his head, but he couldn't, so was obliged to content himself with an ugly grin. "That bird is flown," he said. "I'll peep. She put me up to it. We was goin' shares on the old lady's stuff." With that Mrs. Chatterton's spirit returned. She sprang from her chair and rushed around from the bureau to closet to see the extent of her maid's dishonesty. But beyond a few minor deficiencies of her wardrobe, there was no robbery to speak of. Evidently Hortense had considered it unwise to be burdened with much impedimenta. So the robber was hauled off to justice, and Phronsie, coming wonderingly up the stairs, came softly in upon them, in time to see Dick rush up to Mrs. Chatterton with a "You're a brick" before them all. After that there was no more hope of keeping things quiet in the house for Phronsie's sake. Meanwhile the bird, who had played no mean part in the engagement, now asserted himself, and blindly rushed into capture. "Isn't he lovely?" cried Phronsie, tearing her gaze off from the wonderful wings as the swallow fluttered under the mosquito netting speedily brought in. "Yes, his wings are," said Polly. "Oh, Dick, do tell over again how it all happened." So Dick rehearsed once more, as far as he knew, the story, tossing off lightly his part of it. Your poor head, does it ache?" cried Polly, feeling of the big bump on the crown. "No, not a bit," declared Dick, shaking his brown poll. "I'm glad I didn't crack on the glass." "That heavy plate?" cried Polly, looking over at the cheval glass with a shiver. Phronsie deserting the fascinating bird, and began to smooth Dick's head with both hands. "Do let me bathe it," she begged. "I'll get the Pond's Extract." "No, I won't," said Dick. "It smells awfully, and I've had so much of it for my leg. I'm all right, Phronsie. See his wings now, he's stretching." But Phronsie was not to be diverted from her purpose. "I'll get bay rum," she said. "May I?" Dick made a wry face. "Worse and worse. Cologne, then." "No, I hate it." "He doesn't want it bathed, Phronsie dear," said Polly. "Boys like to get hurt, you know. 'Tisn't manly to be fixed up." Phronsie gave a sigh, which so went to Dick's heart that he said, "All right, bring on some water if you want to, but don't get any brown paper. I've had enough of that when I was a boy." At the end of that exciting day, the secret came out, after all, in rather a tame fashion. Dr. Fisher and Jasper met Polly at an angle of the hall as she was running upstairs after dinner for her school books. "Polly," asked the little doctor, putting both hands on her shoulders and looking into the brown eyes, "should you be willing to go abroad with your mother and Phronsie, Mr. King and Jasper?" "Oh!" Polly gasped. "But you," came in a later breath. "We couldn't leave you," she cried loyally. "Well, I suppose I should go along too," said the little doctor, enjoying her face. "Why, Jasper Elliott King!" cried Polly, slipping out from under the doctor's palms, and seizing the two hands extended, she began to spin around as in the olden days. "Did you ever hear of anything so perfectly magnificent? But Ben and Joel and Davie!" She paused on the edge of another pirouette. Dr. Fisher made haste to answer, "Polly, Mrs. Whitney will take care of them," and Jasper led her off into the dance again. "How can we ever leave the boys? Oh, I don't see," cried Polly, a bit reproachfully, her hair blown over her rosy cheeks, as they danced lightly down the long hall. Dr. Fisher leaned against a pillar and watched them. "Have to," said Jasper, guiding his partner deftly in the intricacies of the chairs and statuary. "That's a good spin, Polly," he said, as they brought up by the little doctor's side. "I'm almost tempted to dance myself," said Dr. Fisher, "if I wasn't such an old fellow. I'd try, that is, if anybody asked me." "I will," said Polly, laughing. "Come, Papa Fisher," holding out her hand, "do give me the honor." "All right," said Dr. Fisher bravely. So Jasper took the deserted post by the pillar, and whistled the Strauss waltz. Thereupon a most extraordinary hopping up and down the hall was commenced, the two figures bobbing like a pair of corks on a quivering water surface. The doors opened, and several faces appeared, amongst the number Mrs. Fisher's. "I couldn't help it," said the little doctor, coming up red and animated, and wiping his forehead. His spectacles had fallen off long since, and he had let them go. "It looked so nice to see Jasper and Polly, I thought I'd try it. I didn't suppose I'd get on so well. I really believe I can dance." "Huh!" laughed Mr. King. "It looks like it. Just see Polly." "Oh, Papa Fisher!" cried Polly with a merry peal, in which Jasper, unpuckering his lips from the Strauss effort, had joined. "We must have looked." Here she went off again. "Yes," said Jasper, "you did. That's just it, Polly, you did. Lucky you two caperers didn't break anything." "Well, if you've got through laughing," observed Dr. Fisher, "I'll remark that the secret is out." "Do you like it, Polly?" asked Mr. King, holding out his hand. "Say, my girl." And then before she could answer, he went on, "You see, we can't do anything without a doctor on our travels. Now Providence has given us one, though rather an obstinate specimen," he pointed to Father Fisher, "and he wants to see the hospitals, and you want to study a bit of music, and your mother wants rest, and Jasper and Phronsie and I want fun, so we're going, that's all." "When?" demanded Polly breathlessly. "In a month." End of chapter 20. Recording by Brianna Simmons, Carson City, Nevada. www.semispot.blogspot.com Chapter 21 of Five Little Peppers Midway. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Brianna Simmons. Five Little Peppers Midway by Margaret Sidney. Chapter 21. The Whitneys' Little Plan. "I think it's a mean shame," cried Joel in a high vindictive key. "You've had burglars here twice, and I haven't been home." "You speak as if we appointed the meeting, Joe," said Ben with a laugh. "Well, it's mean anyway," cried Joel, with a flash of his black eyes. "Now there won't come any again in an age." "Goodness, I hope not," ejaculated Mr. King, lowering his newspaper to peer over its top. "I'd have floored him," declared Joel, striking out splendidly from the shoulder, "if only I'd been here." "All very well," said Percy negligently, "but you weren't here," and he laughed softly. "Do you mean to say that I couldn't have handled the burglar?" demanded Joel belligerently, and advancing on Percy. "Say, because if you do, why, I'll try a bout with you." "I didn't say anything what you could or couldn't do. I said you weren't here, and you weren't. That's enough." And Percy turned his back on him, thrust his hands into the pockets of his morning jacket, and stalked to the window. Van opened his mouth to speak, then thought better of it, and gave a low whistle. Joel, finding no enthusiasm for the tales of his fighting prowess, ran off to interview Dick on the old topic of the burglary, and to obtain another close account of its details. To think Phronsie saw the other burglar 5 years ago, and now Dick was on hand for this one. Those two babies, he fumed, and none of us men around. "Percy," said Van, "come out in the hall, will you?" "What do you want?" asked Percy lazily. "Oh, you come along," cried Van, laying hold of his jacket. "See here," dropping his voice cautiously, as he towed him successfully out. "Let's give Joe a chance to see a burglar. He wants to so terribly." "What do you mean?" asked Percy with astonished eyes, his hands still in his pockets. Van burst into a loud laugh, then stopped short. "It'll take 2 of us," he whispered. "Oh, Van!" exclaimed Percy, and pulling his hands from their resting places, he clapped them smartly together. "But we ought not, I really suppose," he said at last, letting them fall to his sides. "Mamma mightn't like it, you know." "She wouldn't mind," said Van, yet he looked uneasy. "It would be a great comfort to everyone to take Joe down. He does yarn so." "It's an old grudge with you," said Percy pleasantly. "You know he beat you when you were a little fellow, and he'd just come." "As if I cared for that," said Van in a dudgeon. "There was nothing I didn't half try, and he went at me like a country sledge-hammer." "Yes, I remember," Percy nodded placidly, "and you got all worsted and knocked into a heap. Everybody knew it." "Do you suppose I'd pound a visitor?" cried Van wrathfully, his cheeks aflame. "Say, Percy Whitney." "No, I don't," said Percy, "not when 'twas Joe." "That's just it. He was Polly's brother." At mention of Polly, Percy's color rose, and he put out his hand. "Beg pardon, Van," he said. "Here, shake and make up. I forgot all about our promise," he added penitently. "I forgot it too," declared Van, quieting down and thrusting out his brown palm to meet his brother's. "Well, I don't care what you say, if you'll only get halves in this lark," he finished, brightening up. "Well, I will," said Percy to make atonement. "Come up to our room, then, and think it out," cried Van gleefully, flying over the stairs 3 at a bound. "Sh sh, and hurry up." Just then the doorbell gave a loud peal, and Jinks, the butler, opened it to receive a box about 2 feet long and 1 broad. "For Miss Phronsie Pepper," said the footman on the steps, holding it out, "but it's not to be given to her until to-morrow." "All right," said Jinks, taking it. "That's the 6th box for Miss Phronsie that I've took in this morning," he soliloquized, going down the hall and reading the address carefully, "and all the same size." Ding-a-ling! Jinks laid the parcel quickly on one of the oaken chairs in the hall, and hurried to the door, to be met by another parcel for Miss Phronsie Pepper, not to be given to her till to-morrow. "And the identical size," he ejaculated, squinting at it as he went back to pick up the first parcel. "As like as two peas, they are." Upstairs Polly was at work with happy fingers. Alexia across the room asking every third minute, "Polly, how does it go? Oh dear, I can't do anything unless you look and see if it's right." And Polly would turn her back on a certain cloud of white muslin and floating lace, and flying off to Alexia to give the necessary criticism, with a pull here and a pat there, would set matters straight, presently running back to her own work again. "You see," she said, "everything must be just right, for next to Mamsie's wedding, this is to be the most important occasion, Alexiaris, that we've ever known. We can't have anything too nice for Phronsie's getting well party." "That's so," said Alexia, twitching a pink satin bow in the handle of a flower basket. "Oh dear me, this bow looks like everything. I've tried 6 different times to make it hang down quite careless and refined, and just to provoke me, it pokes up like a stiff old thing in my face. Do come and tie it, Polly." So Polly jumped up again, and laying determined fingers on the refractory bow, sent it into a shape that Alexia protested was too lovely for anything. "Are you going to have a good-bye party?" asked Alexia after a minute. "I suppose so," said Polly. "Grandpapa said I would better, but oh dear me, I don't believe I can ever get through with it in all this world." And Polly hid her face behind a cloud of muslin that was slowly coming into a shape of a dress for one of Phronsie's biggest dolls. "It will be dreadful," said Alexia, with a pathetic little sniff, and beginning on a second pink bow. "But then, you know, it's your duty to go off nicely, and I'm sure you can't do it, Polly, without a farewell party." "Yes," said Polly slowly, "but then I'd really rather write little notes to all the girls. But I suppose they'll all enjoy the party," she added. "Indeed they will," declared Alexia quickly. "Oh dear me, I wish I was going with you. You'll have a perfectly royal time." "I'm going to work hard at my music, you know," declared Polly, raising her head suddenly, a glow on her round cheek. "Oh, well, you'll only peg away at it when you've a mind," said Alexia carelessly, and setting lazy stitches. "Most of the time you'll be jaunting around seeing things and having fun generally. Oh, don't I wish I was going with you." "Alexiaris!" cried Polly in astonishment, and casting her needle from her, she deserted the muslin cloud summarily. "Only peg away when I have the mind?" she repeated indignantly. "Well, I shall have the mind most of the time, I can tell you. Why, that's what I'm going abroad for, to study music. How can I ever teach it if I don't go, pray tell?" she demanded, and now her eyes flashed and her hands worked nervously. "Oh, nonsense!" cried Alexia, not looking at the face before her, and going on recklessly. "As if that meant anything, all that talk about you being a music teacher, Polly," and she gave a little incredulous laugh. Polly got out of her chair somehow, and stood very close to the fussing fingers over the pink satin bow. "Do you never dare say that to me again," she commanded. "It's the whole of my life to be a music teacher, the very whole." "Oh, Polly!" Down went the satin bow, dragging with it Alexia's spoil of silk and the dainty scissors. Don't! I didn't mean anything, but you really know that Mr. King will never let you be a music teacher in all this world. Never, you know it, Polly. Oh, don't look like that, please don't." "He will," said Polly in a low but perfectly distinct voice, "for he has promised me." "Well, he'll get out of it somehow," said Alexia, her evil genius urging her on, "for you know, Polly, that it would be queer for any of his family, and a girl of our set, to turn out a music teacher. You know, Polly, that it would." And Alexia smiled in the most convincing way, and jumped up to throw her arms around her friend. "If any of the girls in our set," said Polly grandly, and stepping off from Alexia, "wish to draw away from me, they can do so now. I am to be a music teacher. I'm perfectly happy to be one. I want you all to understand. Just as happy as I can possibly be in all this world. Why, it's what I've been studying and working for, and how else do you suppose I can ever repay dear Grandpapa for helping me?" Her voice broke, and she stopped a minute, clasping her hands tightly to keep back the rush of words. "Oh, Polly!" cried Alexia in dismay, and beginning to whimper, she tried again to put her arm around her. "Don't touch me," said Polly, waving her off with an imperative hand. "Oh, Polly, Polly!" "And the rest of our set may feel as you do, then I don't want them to keep on liking me," said Polly, with her most superb air, and drawing off further yet. "Polly, if you don't stop, you'll kill me," gasped Alexia. "Oh, Polly, I don't care what you are. You may teach all day if you want to, and I'll help you get scholars. I'll do anything, and so will all the girls. I know they will. Polly, do let me be your friend, just as I was. Oh, dear, dear, I wish I hadn't said anything. I wish I had bitten my tongue off. I didn't think you'd mind it so much." And now Alexia broke down and sobbed outright. "You've got to say it's glorious to teach," said Polly, unmoved, and with her highest air on, "and that you're glad I'm going to do it." It's glorious to teach," mumbled poor Alexia behind her wet handkerchief. "And I'm glad you're going to do it," dictated Polly inflexibly. "I'm glad you're going to do it," echoed Alexia in a dismal tone. "Then I'll be your friend once more," consented Polly with a slow step toward Alexia. "That is, if you never in all this world say such a dreadful thing again, Alexia Rhys." "Don't ask me, you know I won't," promised Alexia, her spirits rising. So Polly went over to her and set a kiss on her wet cheek, comforting her as only Polly could, and before long the pink satin bow with the spool of silk hanging to it, and the scissors were found under the table, and Polly attacked the muslin cloud with redoubled vigor, and the girls' voices carried merry laughter and scraps of happy talk, and Mrs. Chatterton stole out of the little reading room next to them, and shut herself up in her own apartment. "Dear me, how fine that doll's gown is going to be, Polly!" exclaimed Alexia, after a bit. "Is the lace going on all around the bottom?" "Yes," said Polly, biting off her thread and giving the muslin breadths a little shake. "Felicie is tucking the flounce. Then I shall have to sew on the lace." "How many dolls are there to refurbish before tomorrow?" asked Alexia suddenly. 4, no 5, said Polly, rapidly counting. "For the one that Grandpapa gave her Christmas before last, Celestine, you know, does need a new waist. I forgot her. But that doesn't count the new sashes, and the hair ribbons, and the lace ruffles round the necklines. I guess there are almost 50 of them. Dear me, I must hurry," and she began to sew faster yet. "What a nuisance all those dolls are," said Alexia. "They take up every bit of your spare time." "That isn't the worst of it," said Polly. "Alexia, I don't know what we shall do, for Phronsie works over them till she's quite tired out. You ought to see her this morning." "She's up in the playhouse at it now, I suppose," said Alexia, "dressing every one of them for the party tomorrow." "Yes," said Polly, "she is." "Well, I hope no one will give her a doll tomorrow," said Alexia. "At least no one but Mr. King. Of course he will." "Oh, no one else will," declared Polly cheerfully. "Of course not, Alexia." And then Jinx walked in, with his 7 boxes exactly alike as to size, and deposited them solemnly in a row on the blue and white lounge. "For Miss Phronsie Pepper, and not to be opened till tomorrow, Miss Mary." "Polly," said Alexia in a stage whisper, and jumping up as Jinx disappeared to run over to the row, "do you suppose they are dolls?" "I shall die if they are," declared Polly desperately, and sitting quite still. "They surely look like dolls in the very covers," said Alexia, fingering the cords. "Would it be very so wrong to open one box, and just relieve our suspense? Just one, Polly." "No, no, don't," cried Polly sharply. "They belong to Phronsie. But oh, dear me!" "And just think," said Alexia, like a Job's comforter, and looking over at the clock, "it's only 11:30, Polly Pepper. There's time for oceans more to come in yet." "It's perfectly horrid to get such a scrap of an outing," said Joel that night, sprawling on the rug before the library fire. "Only 4 days. Why couldn't Mr. Marks be sick longer than that, if he was going to be sick at all, pray?" "These 4 days will give you strength for your exams, won't they, Joe?" asked Van. Joel turned his black eyes on him, and coolly said, "Yes." then made a wry face, doubled up a bit of paper, and aimed it at Fan. Davy sighed and looked up anxiously. "I hope Mr. Marks will come out all right, so that we can go back Monday." "I only hope he'll stay ill," said Joel affectionately. "'Tisn't safe anyway for us to go back Monday. It may be typhoid fever, you know, Mamsie," looking over at her. "They'll let us know soon enough, if that's the case," said Mother Fisher, in the lamplight over by the center table. "No, I expect your letter to morrow will say, 'Come Monday.'" "Well, it's a downright shame for us to be pulled off so soon," cried Joel indignantly, sitting straight. "Think how soon the term ends, Joe," cried Polly. "Then you have such a long outing." She sighed as she thought of the separation to come, and the sea between them. "That's nothing. Only a dreadful little time. Soon we'll be gone," grunted Joel, turning his face to look at the brightly leaping flames the cool evening had made necessary. Ben glanced over at Polly. "Don't talk of the summer," he was going to say, but stopped in time. Phronsie set her doll carefully in the corner on the sofa, and went over to Joel. "Does your head ache often at school, Joel?" she asked softly, laying her cool little palm on his stubby hair. "Yes," said Joel, "it does, awfully, Phronsie, and nobody cares and says, 'Stop studying.'" A shout greeted this. "That's too bad," said Phronsie pityingly. "I shall just write and ask Mr. Marks if he won't let you stop and rest when it aches." "'Twouldn't do any good, Phronsie," said Joel. "Nothing would. He's a regular old grinder, Marks is." "Mr. Marks," said Phronsie slowly, "I don't know who you mean by Marks, Joel. And what is a grinder, please?" getting down on her knees to look into his face. "And he works us boys so, Phronsie, you can't think," said Joel, ignoring the question. "What is a grinder, Joel? Please tell me," repeated Phronsie with gentle persistence. "Oh, a grinder is a horrid buffer," began Joel impatiently. "Joel," said Mrs. Fisher reprovingly. The fire in her black eyes was not too pleasant to look at, and after one glance he turned back to the blazing logs once more. "I can't help it," he muttered, picking up the tongs to poke the fire. "Don't ever let me hear that excuse from a son of mine," said Mother Fisher scornfully. "Can't help it. I'd be master of myself, that's one thing." Joel set the tongs back with an unsteady hand. They slipped and fell to the hearth with a clang. "Mamsie, I didn't mean," he began, finding his feet, and before anyone could draw a long breath, he rushed out of the room. There was a dreadful pause. Polly clasped her hands tightly together, and looked at her mother. Mrs. Fisher quietly put her sewing into the big basket, and got out of her chair. "Oh, what is the matter with Joey?" cried Phronsie, standing quite still by the deserted hearth rug. "Mamsie, do you suppose his head aches?" "I think it must," said Mrs. Fisher gravely. Then she went out very quietly, and they could hear her going up the stairs. With a firm step she went into her own room, and turned up the gas. The flash revealed Joel, face downward, on the broad, comfortable sofa. Mrs. Fisher went over and closed the door, then came to his side. "I thought, my boy," she said, "that I should find you here. Now then, tell Mother all about it." And lifting his head, she sat down and took it into her lap. "Oh, dear!" cried Joel, burrowing deep into the comfortable lap. "Oh, dear! Oh, dear!" "Now, that is silly, Joey," said Mother Fisher. "Tell me at once what all this trouble is about," passing her firm hand over his hot forehead, and trying to look in his face, but he struggled to turn it away from her. "In the first place, I just hate school," he exploded. End of chapter 21. Recording by Brianna Simmons, Carson City, Nevada. www.semispot.blogspot.com. Chapter 22 of Five Little Peppers Midway. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Brianna Simmons. Five Little Peppers Midway by Margaret Sidney. Chapter 22. Joel. "Hate school?" cried Mother Fisher. "Oh, Joey, Think how Ben wanted more schooling, only he wouldn't take the chance when Mr. King offered it to him, because he felt that he must be earning money as soon as possible. Oh, Joey!" That "Oh, Joey" cut deeply. Joel winced and burrowed deeper under his mother's fingers. "That's just it," he cried. "Ben wanted it, and I don't. I hate it, and I don't want to go back." "Don't want to go back," repeated Mrs. Fisher in dismay. "No, I don't. The fellows are always twitting me, and everyone gets ahead of me, and I'm everlastingly staying in from ball games to make up lessons, and I'd like to fire the books, I would," cried Joel with venom. Mrs. Fisher said nothing, but the hands still stroked the brown stubby head in her lap. "And nobody cares for me because I won't be smart like the others, but I can't help it. I just hate school," finished Joel in the same strain. "Joel," said Mrs. Fisher slowly, "if that is the case, I shall go down to Mr. King and tell him that we, Father Fisher and I, Polly and Phronsie, will not go abroad with him." Joel bolted upright, and putting down his two hands, brought his black eyes to bear on her. "What?" "I shall go directly downstairs and tell Mr. King that Father Fisher and I, Polly and Phronsie, will not go abroad with him," repeated his mother slowly and distinctly, while she looked him fully in the face. "You can't do that," said Joel in amazement. "He's engaged the staterooms." "That makes no difference," said Mrs. Fisher. "When a woman has a boy who needs her, nothing should stand in the way, and I must stay home and take care of you, Joel." Joel sprang to his feet and began to prance up and down the floor. "I'm big enough to take care of myself, Mother," he declared, coming up to her, to prance off again. "So I thought," said Mrs. Fisher composedly, "or I shouldn't have placed you at Mr. Marks's school." "The idea, Mamsie, of your staying home to take care of me," said Joel excitedly. "Why, feel of that." He bared his arm, and coming up, thrust it out for inspection. "Isn't that splendid? I do verily believe I could whip any fellow in school, I do," he cried, regarding his muscles affectionately. "If you don't believe it, just pinch them hard. You don't mean it really, Mamsie, what you said, of course. The idea of staying at home to take care of me," and he began to prance again. "I don't care how many boys you can whip," observed Mother Fisher coolly, "as long as you can't whip your own self when you're naughty. You're too weak to go alone, and I must stay at home." Joel stopped suddenly and looked at her. "And before I'd give up, a boy of 13, and beg to be taken away from school because the lessons were hard, and I didn't like to study, I'd work myself to skin and bone, but I'd go through creditably." Mrs. Fisher sat straight now as an arrow in the corner of the sofa. "I've said my say, Joel," she finished after a pause, "and now I shall go down and tell Mr. King." "Mother!" howled Joel, dashing across the room to her. "Don't go. I'll stay, I will. Don't say that again about my having to be taken care of like a baby. I'll be good, Mother, and study." "Study doesn't amount to much, unless you are glad of the chance," said Mrs. Fisher sharply. "I wouldn't give a fig for it, being driven to it," and her lips curled scornfully. Joel wilted miserably. "I do care for the chance," he cried. "Just try me and see." Mrs. Fisher took his sunburnt face between her two hands. "Do you really wish to go back to school and put your mind on your books? Be honest now." "Yes, I do," said Joel without winking. "Well, you never told me a lie, and I know you won't begin now," said Mother Fisher, slowly releasing him. "You may go back, Joe. I'll trust you." "Phronsie," said Jasper, as the sound of the two voices could be heard in Mother Fisher's room, "don't you want to come into my den? I've some new bugs in the cabinet. Found a regular beauty to-day." Phronsie stood quite still, just where Joel had left her. Her hands were clasped, and tears were rolling slowly down her cheeks. "No," she said, without looking at him. "Jasper, I don't." "Do come, Phronsie," he begged, going over to her and holding out his hand. "You can't think how nice the new one is, with yellow stripes and two long horns. Come and see it, Phronsie." "No, Jasper," said the child quietly. Then in the next breath, "I think Joey must be very sick." "Oh, Mamsie is taking care of him, and he'll soon be all right," broke in Polly cheerfully. "Do go with Jasper, Phronsie, do, dear." She took hold of the clasped hands and smiled into the drooping face. But Phronsie shook her head and said no. "If Grandpapa should come in and find her so, 'twould be very dreadful," exclaimed Polly, looking over at the 5 boys, who in this sudden emergency were knocked speechless. "Do let us all play some game. Can't someone think of one?" "Let us play 20 questions," proposed Jasper brightly. "I'll begin it. I've thought of something." "That's horrid," cried Van, finding his tongue. "None of us want to play that, I'm sure." "I do," said David. "I think 20 questions is always nice. Is it animal, vegetable, or mineral, Jasper?" "I'm sick of it. Do play something not quite as old as the hills, I beg." "Well, you think of something yourself, old man," said Jasper, nodding furiously at him. "Hurry up." "I'd rather have Polly tell a story than any game you could possibly think of," said Van, going over to her, where she sat on the rug at Phronsie's feet. "Polly, will you?" he asked wheedlingly. "Don't ask her tonight," interposed Jasper. "Yes, I shall. It's the only time we shall have," said Van, "before we go back to school." "Do, Polly, will you?" he begged again. "I can't think of the first thing," declared Polly, pushing back little rings of brown hair from her forehead. "Don't try to think, just spin it off," said Van. "Now begin." "You're a regular nuisance, Van," exclaimed Jasper indignantly. "Polly, I wouldn't indulge him." "I know Phronsie wants a story, don't you, Phronsie?" asked Van artfully, and running over to peer into her face. But to his astonishment, Phronsie stood perfectly still. "No," she said again, "I don't want a story. Joey must be sick." "Jasper," cried Polly in despair, and springing up, "something must be done. Grandpapa's coming, I hear him." "Phronsie," said Jasper, bending to speak into her ear, "do you know you are making Polly feel very unhappy? Just think, the next thing I don't know but she will cry." Phronsie unfolded her hands. "Give me your handkerchief, Polly," she said, winking back the rest of the tears. "Now, there's a dear," cried Polly, pulling out her handkerchief, and wiping the wet little face. None too soon, the door opened and Mr. King came in. "Well, well, well!" he exclaimed, looking over his spectacles at them all. "Playing games, hey?" "We're going to," said Ben and Jasper together. "No, Polly is going to tell a story," said Van loudly. "That is, if you want to hear it, Grandpapa. Do say you do," he begged, going over to whisper in his ear. "I want immensely to hear it," declared the old gentleman, pulling up an easy chair to the fireside. "There now," sitting down, "I'm fixed. Now proceed, my dear." Van softly clapped his hands. "Phronsie," Mr. King beckoned to her, and then suggestively touched his knee. "Here, dear." Phronsie scurried across the room to his side. "Yes, Grandpapa." "There, up she goes," sang Mr. King, swinging her into position on his lap. "Now then, Polly, my child, we are all ready for the wonderful tale. Stay, where is Joel?" "Joel went upstairs a little while ago," said Jasper quickly. "Well, now, Polly, do begin." "I'll tell how we went to buy Phronsie's shoes," said Polly, drawing up an ottoman to Mr. King's side. "Now, boys, bring your chairs up." "Joel ought to know that you are going to tell a story, Polly," said Mr. King. "One of you boys run out and call him at the foot of the stairs." "He's in Mamsie's room," said Ben. "I suppose when she gets through with him, he'll come down." "Oh, ah!" said the old gentleman. "Well, Polly, then perhaps you would better proceed." So Polly began on the never tiresome recital, how Phronsie fell down the stairs leading from the kitchen to the provision room in the little brown house, with the bread knife in her hand, and how, because she cut her thumb so that it bled dreadfully, Mother decided that she could at last have a pair of shoes bought especially for her own self, and how Deacon Brown's old horse and wagon were procured, and they all set forth except Mother, and how they rode to town, and how the beeves were just as good as gold, and how the red-topped shoes fitted as if they were made for Phronsie's feet, and how they all went home, and how Phronsie danced around the kitchen till she was all tired out, and then went to bed carrying the new shoes with her, and how she fell asleep with "Why, I declare!" exclaimed Polly, reaching this denouement in a delightfully roundabout way, "if she isn't asleep now!" And indeed she was. so she had to be carried up to bed in the same old way, only this time it was Jasper instead of Polly who held her. "Don't you believe we'd better put it off until some other night?" whispered Percy to Van on the way upstairs to bed, the library party having broken up early. "A fellow doesn't want to see a burglar on top of the time Joel has had." "No, no," said Van, "it'll be good for him, and knock the other thing out of his head. Don't you see, Percy? I should want something else to think of if I were Joel. You can't back out. You promised, you know." "Well, I'll do it," said Percy testily. "It's no use trying to sleep," declared Joel in the middle of the night, and kicking the bedclothes for the dozenth time into a roll at the foot. "As long as I can see Mamsie's eyes, I'll just get up and tackle that Latin grammar now. Whew! Haven't I got to work, though! Might as well begin it," and he jumped out of bed. Stepping softly over to the door that led into David's little room, he closed it carefully, and with a sigh lighted the gas. Then he went over to the table where his schoolbooks ought to have been, but instead the space was piled with a great variety of things, 1 or 2 balls, a tennis racket, and a confusion of fishing tackle, while in the front, the last thing that had occupied him that day, lay a book of artificial flies. Joel set his teeth together hard and looked at them. "Suppose I shan't get much of this sort of thing this summer," he muttered. "Here goes," and without trusting himself to take another look, he swept them all off down to the floor and into a corner. "There," he said, standing up straight, "lie there, will you?" But they loomed in a suggestive heap, and his fingers trembled just to touch them once. "I must cover up the things, or else I know I'll be at them," he said, and hurrying over to the bed, he dragged off the coverlid. "Now," and he threw it over the fascinating mass, "I've got to study. Dear me, where are my books?" For the next 5 minutes Joel had enough to do to collect his working instruments, and when at last he unearthed them from the corner of his closet where he had thrown them under a pile of boots, he was tired enough to sit down. "I don't know which to go at first," he groaned, whirling the leaves of the upper book. "It ought to be Latin, but then it ought to be algebra just as much, and as for history, well, there, here goes. I'll take them as they come." With a very red face, Joel plunged into the first one under his hand. It proved to be the Latin grammar, and with a grimace he found the page, and resting his elbows on the table, he seized each side of his stubby head with his hands. "I'll hang on to my hair," he said, and plunged into his task. And now there was no sound in the room but his hard breathing, and the noise he made turning the leaves, for he very soon found he was obliged to go back many lessons to understand how to approach the one before him, and with cheeks growing every instant more scarlet with shame and confusion, the drops of perspiration ran down his forehead and fell on his book. "Whew!" he exclaimed, "it's horribly hot," and pushing back his book, he tiptoed over to the other window and softly raised it. The cool air blew into his face, and leaning far out into the dark night, he drew in deep breaths. "I've skinned through and saved my neck 1,000 times," he reflected, "and now I've got to dig like 60 to make up. There's Dave now, sleeping in there like a cat. He doesn't have anything to do but to run ahead of the class like lightning, just because he loves it." Something seemed to sting the words into him. Joel drew in his head and turned abruptly away from the window. "Pshaw! Well, here goes," he exclaimed again, throwing himself into his chair. "She said I'd work myself to skin and bone, but I'd get through creditably." Joel bared his brown arm and regarded it critically. "I wonder how 'twould look all skin and bone," and he gave a short laugh. "But this isn't studying." He pulled down his sleeve, and his head went over the book again. Outside, a bright blue eye applied to the keyhole gave place to a bright brown one, till such time as the persons to whom the eyes belonged were satisfied as to the condition of the interior they were surveying. "What do you suppose he's doing?" whispered the taller figure, putting his face concealed under a black mask, closely to the ear of the other person, whose countenance was similarly adorned. "I don't know," whispered the second black mask. He acts dreadfully queer, but I suppose he's got a novel. So you see it's our duty to break it up," he added virtuously. The taller figure shook his head, but as it was very dark on their side of Joel's door, the movement was unobserved. "Well, come on," whispered the second black mask. "Are you ready?" "Yes." "Come then." "Oh dear, dear," grunted Joel. "I'd rather chop wood as I used to, years ago, to help the little brown house out," swinging his arms up over his head. "Why—" And he was left in darkness, his arms falling nervously to his side, while a cautious step across the room made his black eyes stand out in fright. "A burglar! A burglar!" flashed through his mind. He held his breath hard and his knees knocked together, but Mamsie's eyes seemed to look with scorn on him again. Joel straightened up, clenched his fist, and every minute expecting to be knocked on his head, he crept like a cat to the further corner, even in this extremity grumbling inwardly because Mr. King would not allow firearms. "If I only had them now," he thought. "Well, I must get my club." But there was no time to get it. Joel, creeping along, feeling his way cautiously, soon knew that there were 2 burglars instead of 1 in the room, and his mind was made up. "They'll be after Grandpapa's money, sure," he thought. "I have got to get out and warn him." But how? That was the question. Getting down on all fours, holding his breath, yet with never a thought of danger to himself, he crept along toward the door leading into the hall, then stopped and rested under cover of the heavy window drapery. But as quick as a flash, 2 dark figures, that now, his eyes becoming more accustomed to the darkness, he could dimly distinguish, reached there before him, and the key clicking in the lock, Joel knew that all hope from escape by that quarter was gone. Like a cat, he sprang to his feet, swung the drapery out suddenly toward the figures, and, in the next second, hurled himself over the window sill, hanging to the edge, grasping to the blind, crawling to the next window, and so on, and over and down, down by any friendly thing he could grasp to the ground. 2 black masks hung over the deserted window edge. "Joe, Joe! It's only we boys, Percy and Van! Joe, Joe!" "He'll be killed," gasped Van, his face as white as Joel's robe, fluttering below them in the wild descent. "Stop him, Percy! Oh, do stop him!" Percy clung to the window sill and danced in distress. "Stop him!" He was beyond uttering anything more. "Yes, oh, Joe, don't you see it's only Percy and Van?" cried Van persuasively, and hanging out of the window to the imminent danger of adding himself to Joel's company. Percy shoved him back. "He's most down," he said, finding his breath. "Now we'll run downstairs and let him in." Van flew off from the window. "I'll go, it's my scrape," and he was unlocking the door. "I'm the oldest," said Percy, hurrying to get there first. "I ought to have known better." This made Van furious, and pushing Percy with all his might, he wriggled out first as the door flew open, and not forgetting to tiptoe down the hall, he hurried along, Percy behind him, to hear the noise of men's feet coming over the stairs. Van tried to rush forward, shouting, "Thomas, it's we boys, Percy and Van." Instead, he only succeeded in the darkness in stumbling over a chair, and falling flat with it amid a frightful racket that drowned his voice. Old Mr. King, who had been awakened by the previous noise, and had rung his burglar alarm that connected with Thomas's and Jinx's rooms in the stable, now cried out from his doorway, "Make quick work, Thomas!" and Percy saw the gleam of a pistol held high in Thomas' hand. Up with a rush came bare feet over the back stairs, a flutter of something white, and Joel sprang in between them. "It's Percy! It's Percy!" he screamed. "Don't you see, Thomas?" "I'm Percy! Don't shoot!" the taller burglar kept saying without intermission, while the flaring of candles and frightened voices told of the aroused household. "Make quick work, Jinx!" shouted Mr. King from his doorway, to add the general din. Thomas, whose blood was up, determined once for all to put an end to the profession of burglary as far as his master's house was concerned, now drew nearer, steadying his pistol, and trying to sight the nearest fellow. This proved to be Van, now struggling to his feet. Joel took one wild step forward. "Thomas, don't shoot, it's Van!" "Make quick work, Thomas," called Mr. King. There was but a moment in which to decide. It was either Van or he, and in an instant Joel had stepped in front of the pistol. End of chapter 22. Recording by Brianna Simmons. Carson City, Nevada. www.simispot.blogspot.com. Chapter 23 of Five Little Peppers Midway. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Brianna Simmons. Five Little Peppers Midway by Margaret Sidney. Chapter 23 of Many Things. Van threw his arms around Joel. "Make quick work, Thomas," called Mr. King from his doorway. The pistol fell from Thomas's hand. "I've shot one of the boys. Oh, murther!" he screamed. And everybody rushing up supposed it was Van, who was writhing and screaming unintelligibly in the corner. "Oh, I've killed him," they finally made out. "Who? Oh, Van, who?" "Joey," screamed Van, bending over a white heap on the floor. "Oh, make him get up, I've killed him." The mask was hanging by the end from his white face, and his eyes protruded wildly. Up flew another figure, adorned with a second black mask. No, it was I," said Percy, rushing forward with an "Oh, Joel!" Somebody lighted the gas that flashed suddenly over the terrified group, and somebody else lifted the heap from the corner, and as they did so, Joel stirred and opened his eyes. "Don't make such a fuss," he said crossly. One hand had gripped the sleeve of his nightdress, trying to hold it up in a little wad on the shoulder, the blood pouring down the arm. At the sight of this, Van collapsed and slid to the floor. "Don't frighten Mamsie," said Joel, his head drooping, despite his efforts to hold it up. "I'm all right. Nothing but a scratch. Ugh! Let me be, will you?" to Mr. Whitney and Jasper, who were trying to support him. And Mother Fisher, for the first time since the children had known her, lost her self-control. "Oh, Joey! And Mother was cross to you," she could only sob as she reached him. Polly, at a nod from the little doctor's nightcap and a few hurried words, ran as in a dream for the case of instruments in his bedroom. "All right, Mamsie!" exclaimed Joel in surprise, and trying to stagger to his feet. "Good heavens and earth!" cried old Mr. King, approaching. "What? Oh, it's monstrous! Joel!" "Oh, it's murther!" Thomas sidled along the edge of the group, rolling fearful eyes at them, and repeating over and over, "I've shot that boy, that boy!" All this occupied but an instant, and Joel was laid in his bed, and the wound, which proved to be only a flesh one, the ball cutting a little furrow as it grazed the shoulder, was dressed, and everybody drew a long breath. "Tell Van that I'm all right," Joel kept saying all the time. Polly undertook to do this. "Van!" she cried, running into the hall to lay a shaking hand on his arm, where he lay on the floor. "Joel sent me to say that he is all right." "Polly, I've killed him!" Van thrust his head up suddenly, and looked at her with wild eyes. "Don't speak to me or look at me. I've killed Joel." "Take off this dreadful thing," said Polly with a shiver, and kneeling down, she seized the strings that tied the mask. "Oh, dear! It's all in a knot. Wait, I'll get the scissors," and she found her feet and ran off to her room. "Now you are all right," he gave a little sob as the mask tumbled off. "Oh, how could you?" she wanted to say, but Van's distress was too dreadful for anything but comfort. "Don't you see," said Polly, sitting down on the floor and cuddling up his head in her lap, "that Joel really is all right now? Suppose we hadn't a Father Fisher who was a doctor, what should we do then?" And she even managed a faint laugh. "Oh, dear, but I've killed Joel!" Van covered his face with the folds of her flannel dress and wailed on. "Now just see here, Van Whitney," said Polly, with the air of authority, "I tell you that Joel is all right now. Don't you say that again, not once more, Vanny." "But I saw Thomas shoot, and I couldn't stop him." And Van writhed fearfully, ending with a scream, "I've killed—" But Polly, clapping her hand over his mouth, kept the words back. Meanwhile, Percy had rushed out of the house. "Oh!" cried Polly, when this new alarm sprang up, and everybody was running hither and thither to comfort him by the assurance that Joel was not too much hurt. "Do, Uncle Mason and Jasper, let me go with you." "No, no, you stay here, Polly," cried Jasper, throwing wide the heavy front door. "Brother Mason and I will find him. Don't worry, Polly." "I know I could help," said Polly, hanging over the stair railing. "Oh, do let me," she begged. "No, no, child," said Mr. Whitney quickly. "Stay where you are, and take care of the others. Now then, Jasper, is Jinx ready with the lantern?" "All right," said Jasper. "Come on." Polly, longing to fly to the window to watch, at least, the lantern's twinkling light across the lawn, hurried off to comfort Aunt Whitney, who at this new stage in the affairs was walking her room, biting her lips to keep from screaming the terror that clutched at her heart. "Oh, Polly!" she cried, "I'm so glad you've come. I should die if left alone here much longer." Her soft hair floated down the white robe, and the blue eyes were filled with tears. "Do tell me, don't you think they will find Percy?" "Yes, indeed," declared Polly, cuddling up to the little woman. "Oh, Auntie, remember when Dickie's leg was broken? But this is much worse," said Mrs. Whitney, sobbing and holding close to Polly's warm hand. "But we thought he was dead," and Polly gave a little shiver. Don't," begged Mrs. Whitney, clasping her hands. "Oh, Polly, don't." "But he wasn't, you see, Auntie," Polly hurried on, "and so now you know it will all come out right about There! Oh, they've found him!" as a shout from the lawn rang out. "Do you suppose it, Polly?" cried Mrs. Whitney breathlessly. "Oh, do run to the window and see." So Polly ran to the window in the next room, that overlooked that part of the lawn where Mr. Whitney and Jasper were searching, and strained her gaze up and down and in every direction. "Have they? Oh, have they?" cried Mrs. Whitney. "Oh, Polly, do tell me." "I don't see any of them," said Polly, listening eagerly for another cry, "but I do believe they've found him." "Do come back," implored Mrs. Whitney. "There, now, don't go again, Polly," as Polly hurried to her side, "but just hold my hand." "I will," said Polly, "just as tight as I can, Auntie." "Oh, Percy is so much worse off than Joel," wailed Mrs. Whitney. "Oh, to do such a thing, Polly," she groaned. "They only meant it in fun," said Polly, swallowing hard the lump in her throat. "Don't let us talk about it, Auntie." "And Van," cried Mrs. Whitney, running on. "Oh, my poor, poor boys! Will your mother ever forgive me, Polly?" "Oh, Auntie, don't talk so," said Polly tenderly. "And we both ought to be out helping. There's Van, Auntie. Just think how he feels." "I can't go near him," cried Mrs. Whitney in distress, "as long as he is in Joel's room, for I can see your mother's eyes, Polly. It would kill me to have her look at me." The door opened at this, and the trail of a long silken wrapper was heard on the floor. "Mrs. Chatterton," said Mrs. Whitney, raising her head and looking at the newcomer with as much anger as her gentle face could contain, "I really cannot see you in my room tonight. Excuse me, but I am unstrung by all that has occurred. Will you please not come in?" "I thought I might sit with you," said Mrs. Chatterton. In the brief interval since the arousing of the household, she had contrived to make a perfect breakfast toilet, and she folded her hands over her handsome gown. "Polly might then be with her mother, but if you don't wish me to remain, I will go." "I do not need you," said Mrs. Whitney decidedly, and she turned to Polly again. Mrs. Chatterton moved away and closed the door after her. "Auntie," said Polly, "she really wants to help you." "Polly, you needn't say anything about it," exclaimed Mrs. Whitney, like many other gentle creatures, when roused, becoming unreasonably prejudiced. "I cannot bear the sight of that woman. She has been here so long, and is so intensely disagreeable to us all." Polly's eyes became very round, and she held her breath in astonishment. "Don't look so, child," said Mrs. Whitney at length. "You don't understand, my dear, but you would if you were in my place." "She's sorry for it," said Polly, finding her tongue at last. "And father is nearly worn out with her," continued Mrs. Whitney, "and now to come parading her attentions upon me, who?" Dicky, now that the excitement in Joel's room had died down, had lost his relish for it, and he now pranced into Mrs. Whitney's room. "Who, mamma?" "Mrs. Chatterton," said Mrs. Whitney unguardedly. "She has disagreeably intruded herself upon me." "Has she been in here?" asked Dick in astonishment. "Yes, asking if she can sit with me," and Polly started at the look in the usually soft blue eyes. "And you wouldn't let her?" asked Dick, stopping short and regarding his mother curiously. "Of course not, Dicky," she made haste to say. "Then I think you did very wrong," declared Dick flatly. "Oh, Dick!" exclaimed Polly in consternation. "And you don't act like my mother at all," said Dick, standing quite stiffly on his sturdy legs and gazing at her with disapprobation. "Didn't Mrs. Chatterton save my life?" he exploded, "when the real burglar was going for me? Say, didn't she?" he cried. "I have yet to find out that is the truth," said Mrs. Whitney, finding her voice. "Oh, Dicky," she added, hurt that he should defend another, worst of all, Mrs. Chatterton, "don't talk about her." "But I ought to talk about her," persisted Dick. "She saved me as much as she could. Because she won't let anybody thank her, I like her more myself. I'm going to stay with her." With that he held his head high and marched to the door. "Dick, Dick!" called his mother, "come back, dear." Dick slowly turned and made his way to her side, but he still regarded her with disapproval. "Dick, I want you to go to Mrs. Chatterton's room and say that I am sorry I refused her offer to help, and that I would like to have her sit with me. Remember to say I am sorry I refused her offer to help, Dicky." She leaned forward and kissed her boy, her long soft hair falling like a veil around the two faces. Dick threw his arms around her neck. "Now you're a brick," he declared impulsively. "I'll bring the old lady, and we'll both sit with you." So Polly was free to run back to Mamsie. On the way there she opened the door of Phronsie's little room, just out of Mother and Father Fisher's. "How good it is that she sleeps through it all," said Polly, listening to the regular breathing. Then she stole across the room and stood beside the small bed. "She looks just as she did the night that she took her new shoes to bed," thought Polly. "One hand is over her head exactly as it was then. Oh, Phronsie, to think that you're to have no party to-morrow." And she turned with a sigh, went out and closed the door. "Percy's here, all right," cried Jasper, running over the stairs to meet her at the top. His eyes were gleaming with excitement, and his face was torn and bleeding. "Are you hurt?" cried Polly, feeling as if the whole family were bound to destruction. "Oh, Jasper, did you fall?" "Nothing but a scratch. I was fool enough to forget the ledge, and walked off for my pains." "Oh, Jasper!" cried Polly, with paling cheeks, "let me bathe it for you, do." Her strength began to return at the thought of action, and she sprang for a basin of water. "Nonsense! No, Polly," cried Jasper, with a quick hand detaining her. "It's nothing but a mere scratch, I tell you, but I suppose it looks terribly. I'll go and wash it off. Run and tell his mother that Percy is found." "Is he all right?" asked Polly fearfully, holding her breath for the answer. "Sound as a nut," declared Jasper. "We found him streaking it down the locust path. He said he was going to run off to sea." "Run off to sea!" repeated Polly. "Oh, Jasper!" "Well, he was so frightened, of course he didn't know what to say," replied Jasper, and ashamed too. He didn't care to show his head at home. "I don't know as I blame him, Polly. Well, it's too bad about Phronsie's party, isn't it?" added Jasper, mopping his face, as the two went down the hall. But Joel flatly declared that the first one that even so much as hinted that a single item of the arrangements for Phronsie's getting well party should be changed, he'd make it disagreeable as only he knew how for that one when he got up from his bed. Yes, sir! And he scolded and fretted and fussed, and laid down the law so generally to all, not excepting the doctor, that at last it was decided to let the party go on. Then he lay back against the pillows quite exhausted, but with a beatific face. "I should think you would be tired, Joe," exclaimed Jasper. "You've bullied us so. Dear me, people ought to be angelic when they're sick at least." "If you'd had him to take care of as I did," observed Dr. Fisher, "you'd know better. Goodness me! The little brown house scarcely held him when he was getting over the measles." "What's the use of being sick," said Joel reflectively, turning on his pillow, "if you can't make people stand around, I'd like to know. Now that point's settled about Phronsie's party, won't you all go out? I'd like to speak with Father Fisher a moment." "You don't mean me, Joey?" said Mother Fisher, at the head of the bed, holding her boy's hand. "Yes, you too, Mamsie," said Joel, giving her an affectionate glance. "It's something that only the doctor and I are to know." "You're not hurt anywhere else, are you, Joey?" asked his mother, a sudden alarm leaping to her black eyes. "Not a scratch," said Joel promptly. "I want to see Father Fisher about something you shall know, Mamsie." He gave her a sudden pressure, then let it go. "Perhaps you would better step out, my dear," said the little doctor, nodding to his wife. So Mrs. Fisher, smothering a sigh, went out reluctantly. "All out?" asked Joel, trying to raise his head to see for himself. "Every soul," said Dr. Fisher. "Well, see here, will you," said Joel, pointing to the table, the school books scattered as he had left them. "Pack those things all away in the closet on the shelf, you know, and put the rubbish on the floor there, back on the table." Dr. Fisher could not for his life refrain from asking curiously, as he did as requested, "Been having a pull at the books, eh, Joe?" Maybe," said Joel, twisting uneasily. "Well, now, come here, please, Father Fisher." The little man turned away from the table, with its sprawling array of delightful things, to stand by the bedside. "You must get me well as soon as you can," said Joel confidently. "All right, I understand," Dr. Fisher nodded professionally. "And whatever you say, don't let it out that I must be careful of my eyes," said Joel. "All right, that is, if you get up quickly," agreed the doctor. "That's all," said Joel in great satisfaction. "Now call Mamsie in, and the others." And in the morning no one told Phronsie what had happened the night before. She only knew that Joel was not very well, and was going to keep his room. All her pleadings to do something for him being set on one side by Grandpapa's demands upon her instant attention whenever the idea suggested itself to her. And so the time wore along till the party began. Alexia was the first to arrive, her bowl of orange jelly in her hand, and after her a tall slight figure jumped from the carriage, her flaxen hair streaming out in two pale braids. "I thought I'd pick Kathy up," said Alexia carelessly. "Had to pass her door, you know. Oh dear me, what perfectly dreadful times you had last night, Polly Pepper." "I didn't bring macaroons," said Kathy, "as I really think that they wouldn't be good for Phronsie. Besides, I've forgotten how to make them, and our cook was cross, and I said I shouldn't come into her kitchen. But I bought a doll for Phronsie. My mother said it would be a great deal more sensible present," and she hugged the long box under her arm with great satisfaction. "Oh, dear, dear!" groaned Alexia, falling back with Polly, as the three raced along the hall. "She showed it to me in the carriage, and it's a perfect guy, besides counting one more." But afflictions like this were small to Polly now, and although for the next hour it rained dolls into Phronsie's puzzled hands, Polly helped her to thank the givers, and to dispose them safely on neighboring chairs and tables and sofas. Mrs. Chatterton's was the pattern of old Mr. King's phonograph doll, at which discovery he turned upon her with venom in his eyes. "My gift to my little granddaughter," taking especial care to emphasize the relationship, "has always been a doll. I suppose you knew that, Cousin Eunice, and try to procure one exactly like the one I purchased is very presuming in you, to say the least." "And why must I not present a doll to Phronsie Pepper if I care to, pray tell?" demanded Mrs. Chatterton in a high, cold tone. "Why? Because you have always showed a marked dislike for the child," cried old Mr. King angrily. "That's why, Cousin Eunice." "Grandpapa, Grandpapa," said Phronsie, laying her hand on his arm. "And to parade any special affection, such as the presentation of a gift indicates, is a piece of presumption on your part. I say it again, Cousin Eunice." "Grandpapa," said Phronsie, again at his elbow. "Now, Phronsie," turning to her, "you are to take that doll, pointing to the gorgeous affair reposing on the sofa, with Mrs. Algernon Chatterton's card attached to it, and go over to Mrs. Chatterton and say very distinctly, 'I cannot accept this gift.' Mind you say it distinctly, Phronsie, that there may be no mistake in the future." "Oh, Grandpapa!" cried Phronsie in dismay. "Yes, child, I know what is best for you. Take that doll and do exactly as I bid you." A dreadful pause fell upon the room. Polly clasped her hands, while Alexia and the other girls huddled into a corner, saying softly, "Oh, how perfectly dreadful!" "No use to say anything to father when he looks like that," groaned Jasper, when Polly besought him to try his influence. "His blood is up now; he's borne a good deal, you know, Polly." "Oh, dear, dear!" whispered Polly back again. "Just look at Mrs. Chatterton's face, and at poor Phronsie's. Can't you do something, Jasper?" "I'm afraid not," said Jasper gloomily. "No, he's making her give it back. See, Polly?" "You'll know it's for the best," Mr. King was repeating, as he led the child to Mrs. Chatterton standing cold and silent at the end of the room. "Some time, child, and then you'll thank me that I saved you from further annoyance of this sort. There, Cousin Eunice, is your gift," taking the doll from Phronsie's hand and placing it in the long jeweled one. "My little granddaughter receives presents only from those who love her. All others are unwarranted and must be returned." Phronsie burst out tearfully. "She's sorry, Grandpapa, I know she is, and she loves me now. Please let me keep the doll." But Mrs. Chatterton had left the room, the doll in her hand. End of chapter 23. Recording by Brianna Simmons. Carson City, Nevada. www.simispot.blogspot.com. Chapter 24 of 5 Little Peppers Midway. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Brianna Simmons. 5 Little Peppers Midway by Margaret Sidney. Chapter 24. Away. And after that, everybody had to be as gay as possible, to keep Phronsie's sad little face from being flooded with tears. "Dear me!" exclaimed Jasper, "here comes Candace. Now what do you suppose she has for you, Phronsie?" Candace sailed through the doorway with ample satisfaction with everything and herself in particular. "Whar's little Miss?" she demanded, her turban nodding in all directions, and her black eyes rolling from side to side. "There, Candace," said someone, "over in the corner with Jasper." "Oh, I see her," said Candace, waddling over to them. "Well, now, Phronsie, seein' you couldn't come to me for somethin' I made 'spressly for you, why, Candace has come to you. See dat now, chile." She unrolled the parcel, disclosing the wonderful doll adorned with Candace's own hair and "Ole Missus' ruffles," then stood erect, her bosom swelling with pride and delight. "Oh, my goodness me!" exclaimed Alexia, tumbling back after the first and only glance, and nearly overturning Cathie, who was looking over her shoulder. "Polly Pepper, oh dear me!" Then she sat down on the floor and laughed till she cried. "Hush, hush!" cried Polly, running over to her. "Do stop, Alexia, and get up. She'll hear you, and we wouldn't hurt her feelings for the world. Do stop, Alexia." "Oh, dear me!" cried Alexia gustily, and holding her sides while she waved back and forth. "If it had been a respectable doll, but that horror! Oh, dear me!" "Stop, stop!" commanded Polly, shaking her arm. But Alexia was beyond stopping herself, and in between Candace's delighted recital how she combed de hair to take de curl out, and how old Mrs. Ruffles was made into de clothes, came the peals of laughter that finally made everyone in the room stop and look at the girls. "Candace, come into my den and get a pattern for some new pins I want you to make for me," cried Jasper, desperately dragging her off. "It's no use to lecture me," said Alexia, sitting straight as Candace's feet shuffled down the hall, and wiping her face exhaustedly. "I know it was dreadful. Oh, dear me, don't anybody speak to me, or I shall disgrace myself again." "Now, Phronsie, what do you suppose we are to do next?" Phronsie looked up into old Mr. King's face. "I don't know, Grandpapa," she said wonderingly. "Well, now, my dear, you've had Punch and Judy, and these nice children," waving his hand to indicate the delegation from the orphan asylum, "have sung beautifully for you. What comes next, Phronsie?" "I don't know, Grandpapa," repeated Phronsie. "When gifts become burdensome, they are no longer kindnesses," said Mr. King. "Now, Phronsie, I have found out, never mind how, little birds, you know, sometimes fly around telling people things they ought to know. Well, I have discovered in some way that my little girl has too many children to care for." Here Phronsie's brown eyes became very wide. "And when there are too many children in the nest, Phronsie, why they have to go out into the world to try their fortunes, and make other homes. Now there are so many poor little girls who haven't any children, Phronsie. Think of that, dear, and you have so many." Phronsie at this drew nearer and stole her hand into his. "Now what is to be done about it?" asked the old gentleman, putting his other broad palm over her little one and holding it fast. "Hey, my pet?" "Can't we buy them some children?" asked Phronsie with warm interest. "Oh, Grandpapa dear, do let us. I have money in my bank." "Phronsie," said the old man, going to the heart of the matter at once and lifting her to his lap, "I really think the time has come to give away some of your dolls. I really do, child." Phronsie gave a start of incredulity and peered around at him. "I really do. You are going abroad to be gone, well, we'll say a year. And your dolls would be so lonely without anything to do but sit all day and think of their little mother. And there are so many children who would love to make them happy." Now Mr. King's white hair was very near the yellow waves floating over his shoulder, so that none but Phronsie's ears caught the next words. "It's right, Phronsie dear. I'd do it if I were you," he said in a low voice. "Do you want it, Grandpapa?" asked Phronsie softly. "I do, child, but not unless you are willing." "Then I do," declared Phronsie, sitting quite straight on his knee, and she gave a relieved sigh. "Oh, Grandpapa, if we only had the poor children now!" she exclaimed, dreadfully excited. "Come then," old Mr. King set her on her feet. "Clear the way there, good people. We are going to find some poor children who are waiting for dolls." And he threw wide the door into a back passage, and there, presided over by Jinx, and crowding for the first entrance, was a score of children with outstretched hands. "Oh, oh!" exclaimed Phronsie with cheeks aflame. "Please, he said we was to have dolls," cried one hungry-eyed girl, holding out both her hands. "I've never had one. Please give me one quick." "Never had one?" echoed Phronsie, taking a step toward her. "Only a piece, miss, I found in a rag barrel. Please give me one quick." "She's never had a doll, only a piece," repeated Phronsie, turning back to the family, unable to contain this information. "Ask the others if they've had any," said Mr. King, leaning against a tall cabinet. "Try that girl there in a brown plaid dress." "Have you ever had a doll?" asked Phronsie obediently, looking over at the girl indicated, and holding her breath for the answer. At this the girl in the brown plaid dress burst into tears, which so distressed Phronsie that she nearly cried. "Yes, but it died," said the girl after a little. "Oh, Grandpapa, her doll died!" exclaimed Phronsie in horror. "No, it didn't, Jane," corrected another girl. "The dog ate it, you know he did." "Yes, I know," said Jane between small sobs. "It died, and we couldn't have any funeral 'cause the dog had ate it." "Well, now, Phronsie," exclaimed Mr. King, getting away from the support of the cabinet, "I think it's time we should make some of these children happy. Don't you want to take them up to the playroom and distribute the dolls?" "No, no," protested Phronsie suddenly, "I must go up and tell my children. They will understand it better than Grandpapa. I'll be back in a very few minutes." And going out, she went quickly upstairs, and after a while returned with both arms full. "This doll is for you," she said gravely, putting a doll attired in wonderful pink satin costume into Jane's arms. I've told her about your dog, and she's a little frightened, so please be careful." "What's the fun down there now?" asked Joel of Van, who with Percy could not be persuaded to leave his bedside a moment. "Open the door, do, and let's hear it." So Van threw wide the door. "Go out and listen, Percy, will you?" he said. "I don't want to," said Percy, who shared Van's wish to keep in the background. "You two fellows act like muffs," said Joel. "Now if you want me to get well, go out, do, and tell me what the fun is going on down there." So persuaded, the boys stole out into the hall in time to see Phronsie go down the stairs with her armful, and carefully using their ears, they soon rushed back with, "Phronsie's giving away her dolls." "Stuff and nonsense!" exclaimed Joel. "If you can't bring back anything better than that yarn, you might as well stay here." "But I tell you it's true," declared Van. "Isn't it, Percy?" "Yes, it is," said Percy. "I heard her distinctly say, 'This doll is for you,' and she had her arms full, so I suppose she's going to give those away too." "A likely story," said Joel, bursting into a laugh. At the noise up in the boys' room, Mother Fisher ran quickly over the stairs. "Oh, boys, what is it? Joel, are you worse?" "No, indeed," said Joel. "I was laughing. Percy and Van have been telling such a big story. Mamsie, they actually said that Phronsie was giving away her dolls." "Is that all?" cried Mrs. Fisher in relief. "Well, so she is, Joel." "Phronsie giving away her dolls, Mamsie?" screamed Joel. "Why, what does Grandpapa say?" "He's the very one that proposed it," said Mrs. Fisher. "There, Joey, don't get excited, for I know what the doctor will say," as Joel sank back on his pillow, overcome by this last piece of news. When Phronsie went to bed that night, she clasped Mr. King's new gift to her breast. "Grandpapa dear," she said confidingly, as they went up the stairs together, "do you know I really think more of this doll, now that the others are gone? Really I do, Grandpapa, and I can take better care of her because I shall have more time." "So you will, dear," assented Mr. King. "Well, Phronsie, I think you and I, dear, haven't made a bad day's work." "I think my children will be happy," said Phronsie with a small sigh, "because, you see, it's so nice to make good times for their new mothers. And, Grandpapa, I couldn't play with each one more than once a week. I used to try to, but I couldn't, Grandpapa." "Why didn't you tell me, Phronsie?" asked the old gentleman, a bit reproachfully, as they reached the top step. "How was it, dear? You should have given them away long ago." "Ah, but," said Phronsie, slowly shaking her head, "I didn't want to give them away before, only just now, Grandpapa, and I think they will be happy, and now I'm going to take this newest one to bed, just as I used to take things to bed years ago when I was a little girl." And after all, there was an extension of time for the three boys' vacation. Dr. Marks was not getting up from his sudden attack of fever as quickly as expected. But there came a day at last when Percy, Van, and David bade Joel good bye. "It won't be for long," observed that individual cheerfully. "You'll be back in 3 weeks." "Oh, dear!" groaned Percy, when safe within the coach. "We've ruined all his chances. He certainly will be plucked now with those 3 weeks to make up." Van gathered himself up and leaned forward in his corner. "Don't look so, Dave," he cried desperately. Dave tried to smooth the troubled lines out of his face, but only succeeded in making it look worse than before. "And it will kill Mrs. Fisher," Percy continued gloomily, "if he does get plucked, as of course he will." "Keep still, will you?" cried Van, his irritation getting beyond bounds. "What's the use of talking about a thing till it's done?" which had the effect to make Percy remember his promise to Polly and close his mouth. But Joel's wound healed quicker than anyone supposed it possibly could, and Percy and Van, who both hated to write letters, gave up much time on the playground to indite daily bulletins, so that he declared that it was almost as good as being there on the spot. And Mother Fisher and her army of servants cleaned the great stone house from top to bottom, and sorted and packed away, and made things tidy for the new housekeeper, who was to care for them in her absence, till Dr. Fisher raised his eyebrows and hands in astonishment. "I really must," he said one day, "put in a remonstrance, wife, or you'll kill yourself before we start." "Oh, I'm used to working," Mrs. Fisher would say cheerily, and then off she would fly to something so much worse that the little doctor was speechless. And Polly set herself at all her studies, especially French, with redoubled vigor, notwithstanding that she was hampered with the faithful attentions of the schoolgirls, who fought among themselves for her company, and showered her with pathetic, "Oh, dear me, how I shall miss you!" and with tears when they got over it. And Jasper buried himself in his den, only bursting forth at meal times, and Mrs. Whitney bemoaned all preparations for the travelers' departure, and wished 1,000 times that she had not given her promise to keep the house and look after the boys. And everybody who had the slightest claim to a calling acquaintance now dropped in upon the Kings, and Polly had her good-bye party, and it was pronounced perfectly elegant by Alexia and her set. And the 3 boys came home for the long vacation, and in 2 days the party would sail. "Who do you think is going abroad with us?" asked Mr. King suddenly, as they all sat in the library for a last evening talk. "Guess quickly." "Who?" cried several voices. "Why, I thought you didn't want any outsiders, father," exclaimed Jasper in surprise. "Well, and I didn't when I said so, but circumstances are changed now. Come, guess quickly, someone." "The Cabots?" asked Jasper at a venture. No, guess again." "Mr. Alstyne?" "No, again." "The Baileys, the Dyces, the Herrings," shouted Mr. Whitney and Van and Joel. "No, I know," broke in Percy. "It's Mrs. Chatterton," with a quick glance to make sure she was not in the room. "No," thundered Mr. King. "Oh, how stupid people can be when they want to. 2 persons are to meet us in New York to-morrow. I didn't tell you till I was sure. I had no desire that you should be disappointed. Now guess again." "Auntie, do you know?" asked Polly suddenly, leaning back as she sat on the rug in front of the fire, to lay her head in Mrs. Whitney's lap. "No, I'm sure I don't," said Mrs. Whitney, stroking lightly the brown hair, with a pang to think how long it would be before she should caress it again. "How anyone can desire to cross the ocean," remarked Mr. Whitney, folding his hands back of his head, and regarding meditatively the glowing fire, "is more than I can see. That I shall never do it again, unless whipped over, I'm morally certain." "Are the persons men?" asked Ben suddenly. "One is," replied Mr. King. "And the other is a woman?" "The other is a woman," said Mr. King. "Well, what are their names? Isn't anybody smart enough to guess them? Dear me, I've always said that the Peppers were remarkably bright, and the rest of you children are not behind the other young people. Go on, try again. Now, who are they?" Polly took her head out of Mrs. Whitney's lap, and rested her chin in her hands. David walking up and down the room, while Ben and the 2 Whitney boys hung over Mother Fisher's chair. "Dear me," fumed Joel, "who ever could guess? There's such a lot of people in the world that Grandpapa knows, it might be any 2 of them that he had asked." Little Dr. Fisher's eyes roved from one to the other of the group. "I couldn't begin to guess, because I don't know many of your friends," he said quietly. "You know these 2 people very well," said Mr. King, laughing to see the little man's face. "Now, but I think I know," said Jasper slowly, a light coming into his gray eyes, "but I don't suppose it's fair to guess, for I saw the address on a letter Father was writing 2 or 3 weeks ago." "You did, you young scamp, you!" cried Mr. King, turning on him. "Well, then, 'tisn't a guess for you, Jasper. Keep still, my boy, and let them work away at it. Will no one guess?" "Mamsie!" cried Polly, bounding up from the ring, nearly upsetting Phronsie, who was sitting beside her in a brown study. "Can it be? Do you suppose it is nice, dear Mr. and Mrs. Henderson?" "Well, Polly," said Mr. King, beaming at her, "you've done what the others couldn't. Yes, it is Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, and they are going with us to stay until the autumn." "Good, good!" cried everyone, till the big room seemed full of joy. "Oh, Father!" exclaimed Mrs. Whitney, "I'm so glad you've done this. They were so kind to Dicky and to me when he was hurt." "They were kind to Dicky and to you," said her father, "and besides, Marian, Mr. Henderson is a man who doesn't preach at you only once a week, and Mrs. Henderson is a fine woman, so it's a pity not to ease up things for them now and then. Well, how do you like the plan?" He spoke to Dr. Fisher, but his gaze took them all in. "Immensely," said the little doctor, which being again echoed heartily by all the rest. Old Mr. King began to feel very much elated at his part in the proceedings, and in a quarter of an hour it seemed as if the expedition had been especially planned for the benefit of the Hendersons, so naturally had it all come about. And on the morrow the whole family, Kings, Whitneys, Fishers, and Peppers, turned their backs on the Greystone mansion and went down to the city. And Alexia Rhys persuaded her aunt to do her semi-annual shopping at this time, and to take her too. And Mr. Alstyne also had business that necessitated his going, and Mr. Cabot and Mary Taylor, and her father found that they must go along too, and Hamilton Dyce was there, and Pickering Dodge, of course, went to be company for Ben on the way back. And at the last moment who should jump on the train but Livingston Bailey. "Had a telegram," he explained. "Must be there at noon. So glad of the unexpected pleasure of meeting you all." And Cousin Eunice Chatterton went, for at the last minute she had suddenly discovered that she had visited at the Greystone mansion as long as she cared to, and notified the family accordingly. And Mr. King had so far made up for his part in the late unpleasantness as to ask her to go with the party on her way to her nephew's in the city. So there she was with the others, bidding them good-bye on the steamer. "Phronsie," she said slowly, under the cover of the babel of tongues, "you are a good child, and I've done well by you. This little bit of paper," putting it into her hands, "contains a message to Mr. King, which you are to give to him after you have started." "I will go over and give it to him now," said Phronsie, her fingers closing over the bit. "No, no," said Mrs. Chatterton sharply. "Do as I say. Remember, on no account to let any one see it till after you have started. You are a good child, Phronsie. Now remember to do as you are bidden. And now will you kiss me, child?" Phronsie lifted her eyes and fixed them on the long white face, and suddenly raising herself on her tiptoes, she put up her lips. "Look at Phron!" cried Joel in the midst of the group, "actually kissing Mrs. Chatterton!" And everybody turned and stared. Cousin Eunice dropped her veil with a quick hand, and moved off with a stately step, but not in time to lose young Bailey's drawl. "'Pon me word, it's the most extraordinary thing. Phronsie, come here and tell us what 'twas like." But Phronsie stood quite still as if she had not heard. "Yes, I hope you'll have a nice time," Pickering Dodge was saying for the dozenth time, with his eyes for no one but Polly. "Now don't stay away for a year." Polly, with her heart full of the boys, who were hanging on either side, answered at random. "Oh, Ben, I can't go," she was exclaiming, and she hid her head on his shoulder, so Pickering turned off. But Joel set his teeth together. "You must," he said, for Ben was beyond speech with the effort to control himself. "I can't," said poor Polly, "leave you, Ben, and the boys." And then Mrs. Whitney came up just as Polly was near breaking down. "My dear child," she said, taking Polly's hands, "you know it is right for you to go." "Yes, I know," said Polly, fighting her tears. "Then, Polly, be brave, dear, and don't begrudge me my 3 new boys," she added playfully. "Just think how happy I'm to be with 6 such splendid fellows to call my own." Polly smiled through her tears. "And one thing more," said Mrs. Whitney in a low voice, "when you feel badly," looking steadily at Polly and the 3 boys, "remember what Dr. Fisher said, that if your mother didn't stop working and rest, she would break down." "I'll remember," said Ben hoarsely. "So will I," said David. "And I will," said Joel, looking everywhere but into Polly's eyes. "Well, I hope, Miss Polly," said the young Mr. Bailey, sauntering up, "that you'll have an uncommonly nice time. I do indeed. I may run across in September. If I do, we shall probably meet." "Miss Mary Pepper?" suddenly asked a man with a huge basket of flowers, and pausing in front of her. Young Mr. Bailey smiled indulgently, as he could not help reading the card thrust into the flowers. "She will receive my flowers at intervals all the way over, if the steward doesn't fail me," he reflected with satisfaction, "while this boy's will fade in 1 hour." "Miss Mary Pepper," the florist's messenger repeated, extending the basket to Polly. "It's for you, Miss Polly," said young Mr. Bailey. "Let me relieve you," taking the basket. "Oh, are they for me?" "I believe you are Miss Mary Pepper," said young Bailey. "Pretty, aren't they?" fingering the roses, "and glad to think that there were orchids among the flowers to which his card was attached, and just placed under the steward's care. "I suppose I am," said Polly with a little laugh, "but it seems as if I couldn't be anything but Polly Pepper. Oh, thank you, Pickering, for these lovely roses," catching sight of him. "Glad you like them," said Pickering radiantly. "Say, Polly, don't stay away a whole year, will you?" Young Mr. Bailey set the basket in his hand, and turned on his heel with a smile. "Come, Polly, I want you," cried Alexia, trying to draw her off. "You know she's my very best friend, Pickering, and I haven't had a chance to say one word to her this morning. Come, Polly." "Polly, come here," called Mrs. Fisher. "Oh, dear!" cried Alexia impatiently. "Now that's just the way it always is. It's Polly here and Polly there," as Polly deserted her and ran off with her basket of roses. "You don't do any of the calling, of course," said Pickering with a laugh. "Well, I'll have her to myself," declared Alexia savagely, "before it's time for us to get off the steamer, see if I don't." "I don't believe it," said Pickering. "Look at her now, in a maelstrom of relatives. You and I, Alexia, are left out." And the next thing Alexia knew, somebody unceremoniously helped her from the steamer with a "Beg pardon, miss, but you must get off," and she was standing on the wharf in a crowd of people, looking in a dazed way at Polly Pepper's fluttering handkerchief, while fast increasing little ripples of greenish water lay between them. And Phronsie was running up to Mr. King. "Here, Grandpapa, Mrs. Chatterton wanted me to give you this," unclasping her warm little palm where the bit of white paper lay. "The dickens she did!" exclaimed the old gentleman. "So she has had a last word with you, has she? Well, she won't get another for a long spell, so never mind. Now let's see what Cousin Eunice says. Something interesting, no doubt." He spread the crumpled bit straight, and read, Phronsie standing quite still by his side. "Cousin Horatio, I have made Phronsie Pepper my sole heir. You may like it or not, as you please. The thing is done, and may God bless Phronsie. Eunice Chatterton." End of chapter 24. Recording by Brianna Simmons, Carson City, Nevada, www.simispot.blogspot.com. End of Five Little Peppers Midway by Margaret Sidney.